And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. What a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas room already. And I see a lot of familiar faces. Tonight is going to be a very special episode. It is X-123. And this is the Female Targets series. It's our third installment in the series, the first two having dealt with the worldwide model and you could say the mistress to presidential power, Vicki Morgan. And today's episode, there was an episode in between there that dealt with Hodel and Elizabeth Short. And today's episode really picks up on that episode, which gets us into occult Hollywood and the real story behind our friend Sue Lyon, who was an amazing actress, plucked out of obscurity and driven to stardom on a rocket ship there in 1962 with her starring role in Lolita. There's always been a lot of interesting stories around Sue and how she became such a huge megastar and then became obscure within a decade, doing sort of B-movie horror movies and then just falling off the scene completely. But her early association with Michelle Phillips and how they were both chosen to do this role of Lolita is very interesting. They were picked out there by someone connected in that whole Hodel family line, which I found particularly interesting. And tonight I'm going to present some very interesting facts concerning Tamar Hodel, and that is George Hodel's daughter. George Hodel, of course, Dr. Hodel, who was accused of being the Black Dahlia murderer. So we've got a lot of intrigue tonight, and what it leads us into is this kind of supernatural aspect that is hanging out there in relation to the deep state and Hollywood. And it's very hard often to put these two things together, and we're going to do that tonight because very often people go on one track and track the occult piece very well, and then the deep state track is left off. And then people track that deep state part and they don't care for the occult part. So we have this weird split in information over and over again. And when we bring those two together, we get a big, wide scale formula going with us. We do not have the lovely Olivia tonight. She came down with a stomach flu and she still wanted to do the show, amazingly enough. But I told her that she could just rest and she'll be back with us next week. But we've got Kat out there running the ideas room, and we'll sort of get through the main presentation. I'll try to grab some of your questions. We'll save the bulk of the questions for next week when Olivia is back. I wanted to start the show off with a follow-up on something that we were doing last week, which was an expose on the CIA invasion of the UFO file. And so before we start in earnest tonight, I want to get into this because they've been making more noises in relation to this, and I have a feeling that they've been thrown off their game, the intel guys, in relation to the bad performance of their main guy out there, Lou Elizondo. And the erratic tendency is so interesting because now what they're doing is they're doing these live streams and things saying, anyone who doesn't agree with us, they're going to be exposed. And they're starting to sound so much like the Corey Good cult and all that stuff that it's giving me a nostalgia trip loop back in time to 4 years ago when all that stuff was happening. But I think it shows a desperation on their side, and that's good in one sense, but also to watch their deterioration in public is very strange. And the latest thing that they're doing, and I noticed that the CIA is ramping up its game, not just in the UFO file, of course, but in relation to the Ukraine matter, trying to get us World War III action, trying to get the first exchange of nuclear weapons. So the CIA nicknamed Murder Incorporated under the Kennedy administration. And, the Kennedy administration understood them for who they were, and that caused that initial split in the society. And we seen that grow through the aerospace track and through the UFO track and the secrecy. But of course, we've also seen it in politics in general and the war of division. And, it moves in through the World Economic Forum. It's another aspect of the same thing coming in from different sides. And right at the heart of that deep state matter, of course, is the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, What's interesting for me is, and I pointed out in relation to the UFO file, that there are so many people working with the CIA around the UFO file who should be independently calling them out in the field, and they're not. And instead, what we're getting, very interestingly, is something very different is happening, which is the CIA is now consolidating different areas of what they need to do next. And one of the things that they're trying to promote at this particular time is the UFO threat operation. So we're going to get into that a little bit. What's interesting is the mainstream reporters who already saw the assault, they used to be in the liberal left. I'm talking about Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald. They see the invasion of the CIA into their fields of reporting. So they see the CIA has invaded all the liberal ends of the spectrum in terms of news reporting. And here's a couple of interesting things that I thought would tie in with this, so we'll understand it in relation to the UFO field as well. Most amazing is the reaction of career journalists to intelligence operatives. Trained liars invading the news biz. They mostly cheer it, even though honest reporters are usually first in line to be displaced by these spook pundits. We have to remember the term spook pundit because it's going to help us on the alternative research side, and it's also going to help us in the UFO field to look at who are the spook pundits. Glenn Greenwald. The most overlooked media story of the past 6 years is the gigantic influx of security state operatives onto the payroll of corporate liberal newsrooms. CNN, NBC, filled with operatives of the CIA, NSA, DOJ, Pentagon, and FBI. They used to have to do this covertly, not now. What I want you to do is take all of their observations there and just apply it directly into the UFO field, because this is exactly what happened. So what I would say is the most amazing thing is the reaction of UFO journalists to intelligence operatives, trained liars invading the news biz or the UFO reporting aspect and the alternative field in general. They mostly cheer it, even though honest reporters are usually first in line to be displaced by these spook pundits. Let's get on board, people. We can see it in other fields. You have to see it on the alternative side. The UFO field drenched in a UFO CIA threat op, and they're pushing it really hard. And one of the things I pointed out is one of their new approaches, since they've been having difficulty launching the Mellon and Elizondo trip, is their latest push is to move out these softer, gentler CIA agents saying, I've had an abduction experience and I'm here to help you. This is quite remarkable. Now, I've put on the record before that CIA officer Jim Semivan is from the CIA director at the top level, 25 years, like untouchable, right there, has the ear of the director. This guy founded the To the Stars Academy, and they added on DeLong and Elizondo. This is the main guy. And he actually is now going around. He's on Whitley Strieber, giving him, the insight on his abduction experience, which supposedly happened in the 90s when he was abducted by aliens. All right, so this is the CIA's new trip. I was abducted, and I'm a CIA agent. You see, John Ramirez is another version of this. Semivan's in particular, very interesting. I pointed out before that on paper, this guy did not exist in the world until 2015. That's how secret his activities are and have been. And as a CIA agent, you would expect at that level he would be incredibly secretive. But why roll out into the UFO field and start playing these games of I'm here for disclosure and I want to help you and I'm an abductee just like you guys, So we're going to see a lot of that. What they're doing is they're throwing a lot of spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks. But I think what to watch for, and just to give us some prognostication for where they're going, is I think that the Elizondo op is faltering, and they're worried because they have a big book push behind this. And if it falters with the book push, then it's going to go off the rails. So they're going crazy, pushing out after even smaller channels that are, I saw them go after a channel with like 500 subscribers. I don't know what the deal is, but they're trying to consolidate the conversation. And they realize that on this level, and on this show, they've lost control of it. So their language is getting very aggressive. And what I think is that shows the desperation, because the CIA, when it gets in trouble on anything, they just cut the op. And I think the flailing, Ramirez, Elizondo, Mellon, Cahill, all that stuff, all those CIA people out there trying to grab that UFO threat thing and commandeer it. This is very important because what you're seeing is the CIA will cut those people if they become a liability. And that's what they're trying to avoid. And so they're trying to prove themselves to their masters by saying, we can control this field. We'll shut everybody up. Don't you worry about a thing. And the problem is they can't do it. So watch for those guys to have more problems going forward and to flail more and to go after more people because they're in Corey Good flameout mode. And so this is going to be kind of fascinating for us to watch going forward. Hey, if Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald can observe it in their field, why can't we observe it in ours? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is episode 123. And it's the X series. We're covering now the deep, deep Hollywood occult experience, the female targets, in this case, Sue Lyon, and coming in through a thread of occult practice that goes back very far into secret society activity. And if you check the record, murder. So, it's a very dicey thing that Hodel was involved in, also with the drug trade. But as a doctor there, his own history was very interesting. And I got to speak with his son. We're going to get his son, Steve Hodel, the former LA police detective, on to speak about his father. He's written a book, and I actually recommend it a lot, and it relates directly to what we're going to talk about tonight, which is the strange part. It is the Black Dahlia Avenger. Black Dahlia, of course, was a woman who came from Medford, Massachusetts, and Medford is about 10 minutes from here in Harvard Square. And Elizabeth Short, she had a kind of aspiration to be an actress, but instead she was, waitressing and kind of picking up dates and things where she could to try to get into the business. And somewhere along that line, she ran into the Hodel crowd. Now, Hodel has a very complex history, which we covered in Female Targets 2. So this is going to be linked, remember. So I'm going to refer to things directly about Hodel that are in that episode. But I'll touch on them lightly here. So there's Elizabeth. And, of course, she was found in 1947. And she had died under very suspicious circumstances. January morning, 1947, the bisected, mutilated body of Elizabeth Short was discovered in a vacant lot. The brutal crime became known as the Black Dahlia murder. It led to the largest manhunt in LA history. The killer teased and taunted the police in public for weeks, but his identity stayed a mystery, and the murder remained the most tantalizing unsolved case of the last century. Now, this is Hodel, older, having accomplished all these bizarre murders and remained a free man. This is his son, who's the LAPD detective who figured out it was his dad who was doing this, and posthumously has set about the task of correcting the record about the deaths of all these different actresses. Now, Hodel is a very complex figure, and his parents came over from Europe. His mom was a dentist in 1900, which is very unusual in Paris. So already we have kind of an unusual signature. The original family name was Golgether, Golgether. And so when they adopted this Hodel name, it was basically like someone calling themselves Jones or Brown. And what's so fascinating is that Hodel was recognized as a genius at a very early age, and all these classical musicians actually showed up to hear him play at 6 and 7 years old. So he was going to be this incredible musical talent, but something twisted him, and there's a number of theories about what it was that did it. And he eventually wound up going to Caltech, which, as you know, we've done a series on the Caltech Pasadena aspect around this, and the worship of the Sun King at Caltech. And so there's already occult signatures around Hodel at a very early age, and they rush him through there. When he's very young, they see that he's talented in this department, and they put him in these advanced programs. And he is noticed, because his incredibly high IQ is 182. And what happens is he gets himself into trouble by getting involved with a teacher's wife. And it becomes a scandal at the school when he's 15, and he is shipped out. And this becomes a weird pattern for him of falling off the horse over and over again. And what happens is temporarily he becomes a cab driver, and then he joins with the local paper covering these very grisly murders and things. And so he already has kind of a warped sensibility, but he's also a genius. So we have this figure hanging out in the background. One of the people he befriends while he's investigating all these gruesome murders and becoming very familiar with the Hollywood crowd is the director, John Huston. And John Huston is so fascinating, you know, as a director and as a character, and has a number of scandals related to him as well. But one of the interesting things, if we draw back the picture, is that in the 70s, Huston will play the sort of main villain in the movie Chinatown, and that's directed by Roman Polanski, who, of course, directed Rosemary's Baby. So we're going to see this chain, this thread go through. And in that movie, he has an incestuous relationship with his daughter, Faye Dunaway, and then she has a child at a very early age, and the child grows up being identified as her sister, and then he wants to have a relationship with that sister and all the rest. And at the end, there's a not to spoil the movie, but there's a girl actually who is supposed to be Faye Dunaway's daughter from her father, and the character looks so much, in my opinion, like Sue Lyon, that I think there's a signature here of this type, and that they were looking for a particular type that could hold this strange kind of incest / occult sex ritual energy. And it becomes very important because when we go back through and we see the connections from Hodel afterwards, we can go right through the Lolita movie and find him embedded right in the center of it, believe it or not. Even though he ran away to China and the UN found him a very cushy job, and his deep state connections run all the way from Howard Hughes to Bush. So we have a very complex figure who's deep in the occult world, but also very politically connected. And that is Dr. George Hodel, who becomes, as I said, the accused killer of the Black Dahlia. And what's interesting for me when I think about Hodel, I'm really looking at somebody who is, you know, kind of possessed in a sense, but he has a definite pattern. And one of the reasons that they were able to call on him as a suspect is because, and this gets a little gory, and I apologize, but I think it'll give us some idea of what was happening here with Hodel, is that the type of dismemberment of his victims required a doctor's skill. And it was a signature in a number of different crimes. And what his son, Steve Hodel, does is he identifies his father as being involved with all of these different other murders that nobody ever knew were involved. And he uses these very specific clues and does a very convincing job knowing his dad as he did. The dad was very much into Mayan mythology, as was Huston. And the people around him, like Man Ray, were given to this kind of surrealistic, Crowley-ish imagery of anything goes in my surreal imagination. So there was a big degenerate vibe associated with it. But one of the things that happened with Hodel is that he got assigned at a certain point to be the head of sexual hygiene in the LA area. And this was kind of like a phony moral majority grand poobah type title. And he was able, through that position, when these Hollywood stars would come in and they would either be pregnant, he would set up these abortions when it was illegal. And so he could move through these different cliques of power, and also had a relationship with the police department. So when it comes time and he's suspected of killing the Black Dahlia, then he has to use all those police connections, and they're worried. There's a lot of tapes and things that have come out about this case, and it's, we're talking 75 years of this case, and they still didn't want to move on it. But there's a lot of tapes and there's a lot of recordings about the police saying, I don't know if we can take this guy on. He's connected all the way up to City Hall. I mean, he's a major player. So Hodel holds a very powerful, not only deep state identity, but occult Hollywood identity. And in the middle of that, he sort of feels like he can do no wrong. So what happens is his daughter from his first marriage, Tamar, comes to live with him. And she quickly learns, and she's only 14 at the time, but she quickly learns that he's in the middle of all these Hollywood orgies and things like that. And so when she gets molested by him and Houston, then she goes to the police, and there's a big scandal. And this is how really the whole Black Dahlia thing starts to backfire on Hodel. So it's a very, very dicey setup there around 47. And Tamar is, very young at the time. She's only 14. And what happens is she takes her father to trial. Instead, the whole community says, oh, the little girl made up this fantasy. They throw her in juvenile detention hall. And Hodel gets off free as a bird, but he's still under suspicion for Black Dahlia, so he takes off to China. So that gives us some idea and some setup of the weirdness that was going on. And this is a decade or more before the Lolita movie would get made, and the whole thing about Tamar would come back, and the Hodel name would get linked in again with this project. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist series. This is X-123. It's Female Targets. It's actually part 3 of the Female Targets series. It's great to have so many of you here with us. And I think the Female Targets series, and one of the reasons why we do it, is there's a real program there in the deep state and in occult circles for how they deal with women as opposed to men. And it's very important for us to understand. So, when we did Vicki Morgan and we touched on the Black Dahlia murder, we were getting into how this operates. But by the time you get to Lolita, you can see how it culminates in the thing that they were trying to do, which was enact this kind of ritual through the entertainment business and to actually do a kind of gigantic test case in everyone's psyche and provide that shock to the psyche that has tremendous occult power. And so when we look at somebody like Hodel, there's no reason why he wouldn't have been actually charged with this murder or others if it wasn't for his incredible grip on power and the incredible secrets that he held. They were like, let's tuck this guy away in China. What his son says is that he came back to the States frequently. And whenever he came back, there was always a wave of killings that were associated with him. So his son attributes all these different things around these different murders to his father. And he's still investigating. This was part of a series, The Black Dahlia Avenger. And what's amazing is, of course, it was his dad, and he's an LAPD detective. He knows what the signs were. But he didn't get to investigate the case until after his father had passed away. And for me, when I look at this case, I'm thinking that it's so crucial for us to get a handle on what it is about the Hollywood aspect, because we get into a lot of sensationalizing, of course, around Hollywood, and it should be. But it misses the point in a lot of ways, because what happens is they'll sensationalize someone's drug use, or, these orgies and things. We had a congressman just come out and talk about how he was invited to all these orgies when he showed up to Congress. I mean, and I think Roger Stone just came out and basically backed him up on that. And he was talking about coke-filled orgies. This is very interesting, because when you go into these fields, you're going to find those threads, and there's a lot of blackmail involved in a lot of kind of debauched behavior. What's interesting about this series around female targets is a little different. And those things are going to show up right in the heart of this, because it's a main kind of currency to what they do. But there's a different signature that I'm seeing and that I'm bringing into this picture, which is there's a large scale occult piece that goes along with this idea of control, which goes beyond just sexual blackmail or drug addiction and things. So the salacious details are going to be there, and very often you'll see very good researchers go right in with that, and they'll lock in with that, and they do a very good job on it. But for me, there has to be some acknowledgement of, in order to grasp who's behind it and what they're up to. So the ritual aspect of the things that they're doing in relation to Hollywood and who's behind it is very interesting to me. So when I found, upon doing some research on Sue Lyon last year and talking with some people who were associated with her, that Michelle Phillips was a very close childhood friend. And I thought, well, that's interesting, because Michelle Phillips, you know, she did the Mamas and the Papas. She was a huge star, a mega star, and a very capable actress, and was associated with Hollywood as deep as you can get, you know, dating Jack Nicholson and all these other people. But she had turned up in a deep state investigation when I was looking into this European who had come over and financed all these movies and was so involved with early versions of selling, you know, kind of derivative bonds and things like this. But I always thought there was more there with Michelle Phillips, and I think a lot of people admire her musical and acting career because, you know, she's done so much good work. But her story and how she got on the scene goes directly back to Hodel as well. And between that and Sue Lyon going back to Hodel, I was like, there's something strange going on here. And I couldn't believe that the more I researched into Lolita, the more and more explosive the whole situation got. Of course, Kubrick was sitting right in the middle of it, Mr. Eyes Wide Shut himself. And that's a shot of Kubrick with his discovery, Sue Lyon. And, you know, the word from Tamar is that she had basically positioned Michelle Phillips to take the role, and that somehow it was Kubrick who basically at the last minute decided to go for Sue Lyon. He had a lot of faith in her, and there's a lot of scandals about the book Lolita. Of course, it doesn't really play into this episode so much from the book. The movie is really where we're focused. The book was a 1955 novel which dealt with, you know, this character, and he was obsessed with what became his stepdaughter. And in the book, she was 12. In the movie, she's 14. And what happened to Sue Lyon during that whole period would cause her to say, my life was entirely destroyed by the movie Lolita. That's also one of those intriguing quotes that you just can't leave alone. So when I got further into that, I started to figure out exactly what she was on about. A little more about Sue. This is Sue back there in Iowa before her mother took her out to Los Angeles. And it's very interesting because she really was the epitome of, you know, very innocent and kind of had these angelic looks. And you have to wonder, in just a couple of years, we go from that to this. And it's very interesting because the Lolita movie kind of unleashed a wave of this stuff that I say it didn't really culminate till like the 80s, probably. And of course, by the time you get to Britney Spears and all the rest, there's a lot of it. But the motif that I saw associated with it the most were these heart-shaped glasses. And we're going to come back to that because that's a motif that has survived from this entire operation that I think we need to be paying attention to, because you're going to see everyone from Paris Hilton to Britney to, you know, just so many of the stars who are on this kind of Illuminati tip. They're so identified that way, you know, oh, we know that that's an Illuminati artist. You know, people have kind of figured it out, but they can't figure out exactly what it is that's going on there. They know they're under some kind of control. So for me, when I'm looking at it, I definitely get the distinct impression that there's a hangover from this original op. And we're going to see that that goes all the way up to Jeff Bezos and stuff. I kid you not, as we get along here. So let's back up and see, now that we have the history on Dr. Hodel, let's look at his daughter, Tamar, who was the one who, after all, accused him of having all these, you know, orgies and parties, and also of molesting her and all the rest. So what we have here is, of course, that's Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia, the actress who was killed. And on the right here is Tamar Older. This is Tamar in the 50s, around the time that she was influencing Michelle Phillips and Sue Lyons. And what happens, it's so unusual, it's not really well explained. I've gone into deep histories and bios and autobios, but the way that she shows up in both of their lives simultaneously is so unusual. She's also responsible for pairing up Michelle Phillips with John Phillips, which is interesting since he was married. But Tamar's basic story was, she came out, and I believe she was being absolutely truthful in giving that entire history, but it was so salacious that they couldn't handle it at the time. And as I said, Hodel himself was so well protected. But what I think with Tamar, what we're looking at is someone who's completely sort of MK Ultra'd herself, and they wanted to reuse her after the fact. And so she had communication with her dad after the fact of the scandal, her running away and having a child and all the rest of it. And what I found interesting is that Showtime did a movie about her daughter, leaving out all of this track 100% and filling it in with a fictional weird narrative and making Hodel into some weird, kind of like, not addressing any of the deep state connections or the occult stuff, just making him some weird, crazy doctor, sort of Dr. Frankenstein type guy. And they fully admit, and I asked Hodel's son, what do you think of that series? And he said that it's just fictionalized. So I definitely feel that they were trying to address it. They were trying to put this thing in a bottle and sort of hope everyone forgot about it. And they put a big black-white spin on it too. So, but actually that story, if you start to unravel it, gets very interesting because Tamar, she will befriend Michelle, who is 10 years her junior. And Michelle at the time is only 13 years old. And through that situation, she will form a relationship with Michelle's father, who was widowed when Michelle's mother died of a cerebral hemorrhage. So this is also a weird factor in there because she's sort of coming in this almost motherly role. And what she's doing is she's giving her drugs and amphetamines so that she can stay up at school after staying out all night with her and hanging out and doing the jazz scene and all this stuff. And this is the life that Michelle Phillips gets into. And she says, you have to go to this modeling agency and start modeling. And it is there at this modeling agency that Michelle Phillips meets Sue Lyons. And Sue Lyons is 2 years younger and has a lot of work through JCPenney. And what happened with Sue Lyons is interesting too, because her dad died when she was a baby, and the mother takes them out to LA to get Sue Lyons to do work because she's figured out that she can be a model at 11 years old. So this is the nature of the situation. You've got an 11-year-old Sue Lyon and a 13-year-old Michelle Phillips working for JCPenney doing these modeling gigs. And the mother then is very interested in getting her daughter into movies. And Tamar comes forward and says, I can get her into movies. And the movie that they're going to make is from this book, Lolita. Now, this is before the Lolita movie was even mentioned. This is 1958. And the movie doesn't get made till 62. And there's no casting or anything till 60. So how she got in the middle of all this is a great wonder. And also, when they ask Sue Lyon when she gets the role, have you read the book? And she said, oh yeah, I read it, 3 or 4 years ago. And Michelle Phillips goes back in time and says, oh yeah, we were reading that, Tamar got it from us and we were reading it. And Tamar would explain different scenes to us, including the most graphic scenes. So Tamar was programming them in effect with the role of Lolita, figuring which one of these two am I going to get into that role. And it's interesting because years later, I saw an interview, which is up on YouTube, of Tamar in a program talking about Michelle Phillips and saying She was the one who was supposed to get it. It was supposed to be her role, but at the last minute, Kubrick selected Lyon. Well, think about that. The two top picks in her mind then for the role were the two people that she was grooming for the role. So we get into now the Hollywood occult aspect and Hodel sort of carrying out this legacy that her father had put into place originally with John Huston and all the dark dealings around the Black Dahlia. Very interesting indeed. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. We're going deep now on female targets. This is the story of Sue Lyons and how she was manipulated into position and associated, believe it or not, with this Hodel Black Dahlia case, which had taken place, 10 or 15 years earlier in 1947. We don't have Miss Olivia tonight, so we won't be taking your questions, although I'll grab some at the end of the presentation. And we'll be back, of course, with questions next week. So definitely save them for that. And I'm looking forward to it because I want to do a big QA with you all. I want to remind everyone to go to the darkjournalist.com website and sign up for our newsletter. That newsletter is probably the best way for us to stay in touch at this point, as we've seen remarkable, and I mean remarkable, censorship going on across the board. And the newsletter basically comes once a week, and it's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch, and it lets us have that flow between each other of all the conversation that's going on, and it lets you know the amazing episodes that we have coming up for you, and you won't blow it. It's just, just forget about it. The interviews and the incredible high-end episodes we have coming up for you in April and May, it's going to be stellar. So you're going to want to make sure to sign up and be counted. Okay, let's go further with Sue. And, Sue, here's three things I want you to know about Sue right away. Very intelligent. From what I can see, very psychic. Family with a history of psychic activity and or mental illness. Very interesting. Incredible presence. Kubrick called her 1 in a million. And you have to think about that with a guy like him, because, he'd already done some pretty major films at this point. And so he had a lot. And I went to the Kubrick archives to find the various letters between him and James Harris. And James Harris was the producer of Lolita, and their little production company, and the things that they had to say in relation to Sue. And there are a lot of things that have come out, some very, very troubling articles about Harris and the way that he manipulated Sue Lyons and basically became the character of James Mason in Lolita and had a relationship with her at 14. What's really staggering about Harris is still alive, incidentally. And the woman who put together this article detailing his relationship, she got in touch with him and said, "Do you want to say anything about this?" And he was like, "I'm not going to say anything about it." So, that it still lingers there, exactly what happened. And it is from that situation, by the way, Michelle Phillips confirmed that this guy had a relationship with Sue. So it's on the record in a number of different places. So that's not just kind of a Hollywood gambit. And what they did with Sue as a result of that is they married her off quick when this got out. And the guy that they married her off to is very unusual as well. And I'm going to do a deep dive on him, but just to show you who we're talking about, he's the guy who wrote the Blade Runner script, working with Philip K. Dick to create Blade Runner from Do Aliens Dream of Electric Sheep? And the fact that she marries him all the way back there in 1963 is a very unusual character. He ran away from home at an early age, pretended to be a flamenco dancer, and got himself busted. This is he's one of these guys. And it is my surmise, my analysis, that the reason that she got married to this actor at the age of 17 was because they needed this, distraction away from the fact that this Harris character was having an affair with her. And let's see, let's get a couple of people on the record. course, this is Michelle Phillips, international superstar, and a great singer, really. The Mamas and the Papas were fantastic, but of course associated with that whole Laurel Canyon gang. And the Laurel Canyon crew is very interesting, as we've picked up on. It seems to have been a very manipulated movement on a lot of levels. And she's going to come in very key when we're starting to look at Sue. And I think in her discussions about Sue, she always has a kind of a fondness and sadness when talking about her, saying, you know, kind of looking at her like that could have been me in a sense. She also gives some very interesting details about Hodel, who she did meet, interestingly enough. So let's get into some of these characters. This is Hampton Fampshire, who she marries now in order to take the heat off of James B. Harris. And Fampshire is very interesting. As I said, ran away from home, flamenco dancer, actor, all the rest. But he ends up being the main man on the Blade Runner script. He does an incredible job with it, in fact. And he's also the person now who they just re-recruited to do Blade Runner 2049. And he's working on all these other Blade Runner projects. He's still alive. He's still with us. And there's a very interesting documentary about him called Escapes, which came out in 2018. I highly recommend it. And I'll tell you what's very inconspicuous, you know, in his attempt, but highly conspicuous to me, is the lack of commentary he provides about his one-year marriage to Sue. And, you know, he talks about Terry Garr, he talks about all these other women, Barbara Hershey, and goes on and on. One little thing about Sue, one little tiny thing. And what's interesting is there's so many pictures of them at the marriage, you know, not only getting married, but at getting the marriage license throughout the media. So this is a program thing. They wanted her married off so that she didn't get into trouble being the paramour of this producer. And that producer, of course, didn't get into trouble because she was 14 at the time. So we have a very strange situation where they're kind of crafting her public image. And what I have developed as a real theory about what's happening here is I think the production company of Kubrick Harris paid him to marry her, because they're not even married a year. They're married from December to September. And it looks very much like it's one of those, let's clear the PR on this. And that's what would make sense. Of course, that guy is, you know, has done incredible work and all the rest of it. But he himself talks about how he was basically a mercenary in those days and was taking all these different types of jobs and had been in a lot of trouble. So it wouldn't surprise me at all. One of the letters that I found in the Kubrick archive is very interesting. It's around December 1960, as soon as they had basically advertised her. And they had just got her for the role, and the movie was going to come out in 62. And he's writing now to Nabokov, who wrote the book, and Lolita. And he's saying, we're making an effort to introduce Sue Lyon to the world, but only through photographs, the shooting of which are completely controlled by Stanley and myself. We're also trying to create the Lolita image about the girl, and this would immediately be destroyed by interviews which would reveal her as being completely opposite in real life to the character. This is really interesting. What's happening is it's getting suspicious to the people working on the project that they never get to talk to Sue. And the only people who talk to her are people directly on the set and or the producer and the director. Nabokov never gets a shot at her. Reporters don't get a shot at her, nothing. She's kept completely off. And what happens is by refusing media access and refusing access to her, they're able to control the whole story about who she is, but also to make sure that she doesn't stumble into something like, I'm going to marry Harris or something like that. So they're keeping whatever they're doing with her very contained. The other thing I want to point out in relation to Sue is that it seems to me that Kubrick doesn't have the same designs on her that Harris does. Harris has real designs on her the way the character in the Lolita book does. But they're both participating, Kubrick and Harris, in creating this kind of extension of whatever was going on with John Huston and Hodel around these actresses in Hollywood in the 40s, and now they're updating it here in the early 60s. And again, it contains those very salacious elements. Incest is involved, underage sex, but it is also this kind of occult ritual around the female image. Now, what's very interesting to me is when I look at Nabokov and these other people complaining, what I'm seeing is they're keeping her boxed in so that she's not able to express any kind of opinion. And what she'll say about this again later on is that that movie completely destroyed my life. We have to kind of take the implications of that, because the way that they had boxed her in may have also been through NDAs and things like that, that she couldn't speak. It wasn't until 1996, when they did a remake of the film, that she came out and really bashed it. The image that they were creating here, of course, with Sue was this kind of teeny bopper sex pot. And what's interesting is this is something that had come out of the original Hodel, Huston, and Man Ray combination. Let's take a look at Tamar herself, who was Hodel's daughter from an earlier marriage. And she herself, who was interested in acting and other things, she kind of has a little bit of that flavor of Sue herself. If you look at her growing up, and it's by around this age is where she goes and lives with Hodel, unfortunately, and has those terrible dramatic experiences. But Tamar, and her middle name being Nays, like Anais Nays, and when Tamar gets in there and she's gone through the system, she's had a child, and she's out there on her own, somehow she's doing just fine, which is also odd. She has an apartment that is painted lavender, and she has a Nash Rambler car, popular car of the time, also painted lavender. And she decides, you know what? At the age of 15, Michelle Phillips is going to come live with me. And the father, who has been kind of bamboozled by her and is, sort of in love with her, says, sure, she can go off and live with you. And that's how she's able to cultivate Michelle into this superstar. And she hooks her up with John Phillips and puts them together and all the rest. So she creates her and Sue Lyon through Michelle. She creates into Lolita. So it's quite a powerful position. Obviously, those connections were working, and the connections were through her former association with her dad. She's a very complex figure, and no doubt was incredibly traumatized by what took place with her. I don't want to put her up there as a villain, but it seems that she was used directly to do the same type of thing that was done to her. And I think we have to keep that in mind as we look at Tamar. She's in the series that they did on Showtime, which whitewashed everything, they present her as this kind of absent-minded teeny bopper. And if we go back to that original set of incidents that took place, the case was a huge scandal, going back to Hodel being questioned and called out for these parties because Tamar had called him out and said, look, we are, I've gone through all these things with my father, and he has all these illegal things going on. Blonde 14 diagrams Hollywood sex orgy. And then down there, it's a little hard to see, but you can see it says father and daughter. And that's Hodel, who is being charged at that point with incest. And what Hodel does when they get him on the stand is quite interesting. When they ask him, did these things happen? And he says, well, actually, in my imagination, they might have, but is there any real difference between imagination and reality? And, he goes into this kind of thing, and it's almost like they're setting up an insanity defense, but it never gets that far because they decide, oh, she's lying, and they ship him off to China. But the op was kind of left hanging out there in the middle of all this. And, what could be done about it? He was already in Asia. And the Black Dahlia case remained unsolved, and they just decided we're moving on from there because as we've seen with a lot of movies in the future, they would go into the corruption around the LAPD. And we had massive amounts of corruption all the way through to the time, I mean, the OJ case and all the rest of it. But the Bobby Kennedy assassination showed it as well. For some reason, LA in particular had that problem, and I believe it's because of the compromise in relation to these Hollywood figures. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. We're going deep tonight on Sue Lyon, who was a female target of this very covert magic force, and you could say it's related to the deep state because it certainly is. But I want to stress that occult comes first when we're relating to this, and what they're doing with her is moving her around through the system for an occult purpose. And in the second part of the show, we're not going to be taking your questions tonight. We'll take questions next week because we don't have Olivia, who has a stomach flu, and but she's going to be feeling better. And she said she was sorry for not being here tonight, and she wanted to do it actually, but I told her no way. But she's going to be fine, and she'll be back with us next week. I want to remind you to go to the darkjournalist.com website and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch with each other on all the things that are going on, and all the really exciting interviews and documentaries and event announcements that are coming up here over the next couple of months. You don't want to miss it, and it's definitely first come, first serve. So make sure that you're on that list. But more importantly, it just gives you an idea without having to, jump through hoops on social media. And if there's any censorship going on there, we've been censored pretty heavily on Twitter and other platforms, but we're still there, and we're still here, and we're still doing it. But probably the best thing to do is, if we have that direct pipeline with each other, we're certainly going to do a lot better. Great crowd out there tonight. Fantastic. And I also want to mention that Kat's out there running the Ideas Room, and the Ideas Room looks like it's brimming with great questions, which we definitely will get to next time. Somebody mentions The Shining. Whoa. Yeah, well, psychic people shine, right? That's the whole point of the thing. Incredible movie. And disturbing, and in that thread of disturbing Kubrick films, who was definitely an incredible genius. And so many of these people that we're profiling tonight, Lyon was a remarkable, remarkable actress. Phillips, a great singer, entertainer, actress. And Kubrick, just a genius. But Kubrick understood and plugged into the whole ritualistic elements that were around Hollywood. And he found ways of showing us things, whether it was about the space program or about, the sex cults and the different ways. Eyes Wide Shut is, of course, this great unfinished movie that they did release eventually with Spielberg doing it. But we know that, whatever the core was, Spielberg let it out. But there's some thread in Kubrick. It's like he wants to bring forward something. And I want to say that although Harris has these very salacious interactions and relationships with Sue Lyon when she's very young, Kubrick does not come across like that. As a matter of fact, there's some favorable letters to Kubrick from Lyons later saying, "Thank you for helping launch my career." And she doesn't have anything good to say about Harris later. So in my investigations, it's quite unusual, because what I see going on with Kubrick is he's almost asexual. And he seems to not get into any kind of salacious setups or rumors and things about himself. As a matter of fact, it just seems like it's completely off the scale for him, that whatever his creative focus was didn't avail him to those types of situations. And so that he comes off as more of a voyeur of that kind of thing, so that when we're looking at the movies that he did that have all those sexual themes, that's what I'm thinking on there. He seems to really lock in on these different sides, which allow him to look into these other people's salacious lives, but never enact it himself. So that's really, sort of the crux when I get to Kubrick. He didn't have anything inappropriate going on with Sue Lyons, but Harris definitely did. As a matter of fact, when she came back from the UK from filming Lolita and met with her friend, Michelle Phillips, she immediately told her, I'm sleeping with this guy. And Michelle Phillips said her reaction was, he looks old enough to be your grandfather. And so she instantly, knew that her friend was in trouble on all this. And I think that Harris is very strange because some of the letters I found in the Kubrick archive are interesting because Kubrick is looking for different projects for her as a follow-up to Lolita. And he says, she's a really good actress. Let's make sure we get her out there. And little by little, Harris is starting to turn against the idea of using her, probably because of the whole situation that he finds himself in. But interestingly enough, what he does in March of 1963 is he writes to Kubrick and says, I have a possibility for Sue. It's the movie Lilith. Depends mostly on Bob Rosen, as I did all I could several months ago when I talked to him. So he's trying to get her put into this movie called Lilith, which she doesn't end up being in, but Gene Seberg is, and Warren Beatty is in that movie. Again, we have more. There's a lot of unusual signatures around Sue Lyons. So we have the whole Lolita thing, but now Lilith is the first woman. She's the pre-Eve wife of Adam. And there's a whole mysterious thread in occult circles relating to Lilith about, how she's kind of more of the matriarchal power base, and that Adam and Eve are a total different mutation. And they want to go with that original strain of Lilith. So there's a weird thing there. And then I'm going to read you, this is the book that Harris, who's having a relationship with this 14-year-old girl, he's trying to get her into this movie. Okay, that's the movie there, Lilith. And I've already described the name. Now check this out. Set in a private mental institution, Chestnut Lodge in Rockville, Maryland, the film tells of a trainee occupational therapist, a troubled ex-soldier, Warren Beatty, who becomes dangerously obsessed with seductive, artistic, schizophrenic patient Lilith Arthur, played by Gene Seberg. Just check this out. This is what he's trying to get this teenager into. Bruce is successful in helping Lilith emerge from seclusion and leave the institutional grounds for a day in the country, and later escorts her on excursions to which she's alone with him. She attempts to seduce him, and he starts falling in love with her. But later he catches her seducing an older female patient and witnesses her behaving inappropriately with young boys on two of her outings. This is the movie that Harris is so, drumming up, trying to get her in. And the movie comes out as a total bomb, even though Warren Beatty is in it. So something about Harris, we're getting the impression later when I'm looking at these articles and notes that he's sending over to Kubrick, he's trying to get rid of her. He's trying to make sure that she's actually gone. And in one letter on September 10th, 1963, and this is from the Harris Kubrick Pictures Corporation, Seven Arts Archive, he says to Kubrick, quote, knowing that Sue Lyon may not be long for this business, this is a year after Lolita. Why wouldn't she belong for this business? It's important to get income from her services without having to concern ourselves with recoupment of monies invested in her so far. We never figured to use her for more than one picture a year anyway under the old deal, a continually increasing per picture price starting at $50,000, which is really dirt cheap for a big star in that period. So the whole thing is a big come down, and he tries to get her involved in this movie called Night of the Iguana, which he does. And what they try to do there with Night of the Iguana again is pair her up with Richard Burton. And this is 1964. And again, she's still under 18. So the whole thing is problematic. And she has a weird relationship because she doesn't like working with Burton because he's always drunk. And Elizabeth Taylor is on the set. But what's interesting to me is, they're basically trying, it's almost like they're trying to pull her work down the drain. And it's at this point that they go off and marry her off to the Blade Runner scriptwriter. Now, those connections with Blade Runner Blade Runner being from Philip K. Dick's imagination of what it would be like in 2022 is very interesting to me. And his idea that we had built a bunch of different clones and that they had a very short lifespan and that they think they needed to be kind of taken care of and wiped out at a certain point. And also that the clones themselves are very almost like Hollywood Aryan supreme. So I think what we're getting there is whoever this character is that's marrying her, and then eventually, as we've described, his very strange background, but eventually he goes into this. There's a thread there with him too. It's almost like they were using him early on as a test experiment for this, and she actually ends up going to court over this and saying that he, extreme cruelty is a way to get the marriage divorce to happen. And you would think this guy, this incredible love of his life, who he married and all this stuff. So they do a documentary on his life. And as I said, it was called Escapes. And he's sitting there and he goes, unbelievable. He basically says almost nothing about her, which is remarkable considering it's basically the biggest thing that happened in his entire life. He had these other stars, but, he marries her. So this is kind of interesting. In that also, they go on and on about this thing about him trying to get money back from Terry Garr's boyfriend that this guy had borrowed from Terry Garr. And they spend like 20 minutes on that. You get to Sue Lyon, you get like 30 seconds. So something strange is going on there. This is one of the few shots of Sue Lyon. And here is James B. Harris, who's having a relationship with her when she's 14. And that is the actor, James Mason, who she credits with really helping her get through the movie and says he was incredibly helpful and didn't act like a star at all and really helped her get off the ground. But Harris, on the other hand, puts her into all these strange situations, and ultimately it seems like he starts to get cold feet. And so I think that the idea that Kubrick and Harris set up this actor to marry her and get her off the screen is interesting. It's starting to show through in a number of high-profile articles just how sleazy Harris is. And so this is something that's taken 50 years to catch up on. What's interesting for me when I look at this also is, we have to think about it on a few different levels. Again, we're looking for this occult operation behind the Hollywood push on these characters and where it comes from and where they are coming from. So a lot of the salaciousness around Harris doesn't have a central role in this episode. However, I'm going to point out just a couple of things because it's starting to catch on. Shadow upon Harris's legacy. This is from Hollywood Reporter. At age 92, producer-director James B. Harris is still with us. A longtime partner of Stanley Kubrick in the early days and the producer of Kubrick's The Killing. That's 1956. This guy goes all the way back. And Lolita, 62. Harris also directed The Bedford Incident, 1965, and Fast Walking, 1982, and Cop, 1988. I haven't seen that one. Now comes Disrepute, an allegation in a new airmail piece. This is from October by Sarah Weinman. I have the article here. I'm going to read from it. It is explosive, again, on that salacious side. He began an affair with Lolita star Sue Lyon when she was 14 and Harris was 32 at the time. The story was initially passed along by Mamas and the Papas singer Michelle Phillips, a childhood friend of Lyons. No one else has confirmed it. Weinman reached Lyons' first husband, Hampton Fancher, the writer of Blade Runner, but he declined to comment. That's weird too, because he obviously knows. So for him to keep himself out of the loop, I find him unusual and almost kind of suspect in this. It's like he doesn't want to divulge the old deal that he made to get married to her. Then she calls this woman who wrote the article. She actually goes out and calls Harris. And so he picks up the phone and they're talking. And she says, this is her quote of the conversation, "Knowing I might not get another chance, I asked Harris straight out, was he Sue Lyon's first lover? I'm not going to talk about it," he said. It was a statement without underlying emotion or self-reflecting, not confirming, but definitely not denying. Our conversation ended immediately. So once she brings this up, bang. The allegation isn't just that Harris crossed the perv line by having it off with a 14-year-old, but that the affair may have instilled a certain trauma in Lyon's psyche. This is what I found so interesting about this. Everyone seems aware that it was this that really set her off on this kind of treacherous mental path. In the article now, Weinman says, there's no guarantee that the level of mental illness in her family, that Lyon's life would have stayed on course, but she never made Lolita, but by doing so, Lyon became a clear example of art making a sucker out of a girl's life, one whose price was too high to pay. Lyon's quote about the movie: I defy any pretty girl who was rocketed to stardom at 14 in a sex nymphette role to stay on a level path thereafter. And in fact, her life spirals into all kinds of strange places. But she is a very A-list star for a long time, in fact. She did Lolita. She did Night of the Iguana, which Richard Burton, who was Money in the Bag. And she also did Tony Rome with Frank Sinatra as kind of like wise-talking detective, which was a big hit. And then the Evel Knievel movie with George Hamilton. So it's a pretty impressive resume up to that point. Then she drops off into very bizarre and very interesting roles that all have seemingly to do with the occult. And I've got a number of them here. And I guess what I want to point out is I want to go back for a moment so we have it in mind where this thread coming through the Lolita film comes from, and Hodel and Tamar positioning Michelle Phillips and Sue Lyon to get one of them to get the role. In this case, it was Sue Lyon. This is the strange Mayan house that was put together by, this is Hodel's house, and it was actually, the architect was Frank Lloyd Wright's son, Lloyd Wright. A lot of interesting things about Frank Lloyd Wright. One is that he was a Gurdjieff student, and two is that his wife was such a high official in the Gurdjieff group that she would pair off people for who were going to be married. And we see this with a lot of cults and things. It's very strange in the Gurdjieff scene to see that. He talked a lot about how there were different types, and that the reason that they were able to plan marriages back in the day is they figured out the type of the child very early on, and they would pair them off in the future. But Gurdjieff was never doing anything like pairing people up for marriage. I'd never heard anything like that. But Frank Lloyd Wright's wife, who was, a major Gurdjieff teacher, she was doing this. So she had her own, and they had their own kind of group, and it was sort of less than a cult. It was more of a creative assembly of almost philosophical ideas. And but that was a group that lasted a long time. The house itself is very interesting and made after, a Mayan style. And inside were all these Mayan artwork. So this guy, Hodel, is obsessed with Mexican art and Aztec art. He will also go to Mexico very often. And so people don't know what he's doing down there. The family wonders, what are you doing down there? There's a huge Mexico signature around the Hodel Phillips Lyon story as well. Michelle Phillips, when her mother dies, the family goes, and they go from Buffalo to California. And then her dad decides, I'm going to go to Mexico. And I'm going to go to the university down there, and my whole family's going to go down there. And in fact, when Michelle Phillips goes down there, she learns how to speak Spanish. So she becomes multilingual and has an incredible cultural appreciation of all these things. And then they go back to California a few years later. So she's been through some sort of program of some sort down there in Mexico, because the same thing happens with Tamar. She goes to Mexico. So there's some loop, and it doesn't seem to me like there's all these wonderful opportunities in Mexico. But you're going to find this Mexico piece over and over again that shows up. So keep that in mind as we move forward in the Hodel piece. Of course, the author, Henry Miller, they're staying with Hodel, and there he is with Anais Nin And she, again, the middle name of Tamar would be after Nin. So there's a big connection here, and there's a huge surrealist connection between how they did things. And one of her major contributions, Nin, is a book called Incest, which is all about how she met her stepfather years after he left their family and has this big affair with them. So we have this thread over and over again through all of these stories. And it's coming up like this: ancient Mayans, Mexico, incest, surrealism, and this kind of underage salacious aspect. This is the thread over and over again. And even as I pointed out with John Huston, who's a close friend of Hodel's, when he does the Chinatown movie, he plays the character of, Faye Dunaway's father and the father of Faye Dunaway's child. So, there's some loop there that seems to run all the way from Hodel and the Black Dahlia all the way through Chinatown and Roman Polanski and Rosemary's Baby. But what interests me, there's enough, kind of bizarre details, and the Manson thing is all involved through that with Polanski and all the rest. So you have all these strange pieces floating out there, but right in the middle of it is this career of Sue Lyon, who got picked up for this by Tamar. So we've got the direct, the daughter of Hodel as the coach, basically the career coach of Lyon. That's the thing for us to watch. And the imagery, of course, involved. Later, I would say that they try to do it, and there's a number of people that they try to do it with before and after Lyon, but Lyon was definitely a key case. And of course, right now, if it had happened a little bit differently, we might be doing the entire episode about Michelle Phillips. That might have been her destiny. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, unfortunately for Sue, she got to be the real Lolita because of James B. Harris. And Harris himself set out afterwards to derail her career, as I mentioned. So Harris has a lot to answer for in there, but what was it that caused them to pick up the whole role and to work with Tamar Hodel in any way, shape, or form? What was the connection there that would have Tamar involved? This is what we're looking for. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Now we're going deep into female targets. And this is a special episode. Really is a follow-up of some work I did last summer, 2 female targets episode. This is part 3 of that. And we're going to make a playlist out of that and keep it going, because I think there's something very specific about how these covert groups go after women as opposed to men. And I think we understand, the male signature very much as blackmail, controlled plane crashes, and all these other things. The female target and the female control seems to be very, very different. And the using of them to try to convert a culture also stands out for me. So the female targets piece, I think, is very important. I want to remind you to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for a newsletter to make sure that you're counted, stand up and be counted for all the amazing things we have coming up for you in April and May, and then some special events and documentaries and guests that you will not believe, and X-Series episodes that will be off the charts. It's great to have so many of you out there, and we don't have Miss Olivia tonight for questions. Unfortunately, she got the stomach flu, and at the last minute wanted to do the show, and I just said, no, you can't do it, and rest up, because she'll come back strong for next week. So we'll hold your questions for next week, and then we'll be back on that front. But I can see already in the ideas room just some great stuff going around, and I know Kat's out there somewhere running the show. All right, next up, I want to look at some of the things that happened to Sue after the big Hollywood period. So there's a strange piece in here right in the middle in the 60s, where after she gets through and divorces this guy that she's married to for less than a year, she hooks up with Donovan. And yes, that's Donovan, Hurdy-Gurdy Man, and all those great songs from the 60s. And Donovan is an interesting character, really, for her. And what happens, and what gives us maybe a hint of what might be behind some of the Sue Lyon piece, is that she's very interested in mythology. And the song, now there's two stories about the song Atlantis, which is an oddball song of Donovan's, but it becomes kind of a big hit. And it has such the Casey signature of the Hall of Records and the Atlantean elders putting this special high technology information about their culture away in these halls of records. I mean, it's so off the charts to have it as a song and then be a hit. But interestingly enough, we have this connection with Donovan having this long-term affair with Sue Lyon and her being interested in mythology, and them saying, well, the song actually is based on the fact that she's very interested in Atlantis. That struck me as really unusual. And then I went back and I found some of the album covers and things and started to look for imagery related to Sue Lyon, and just to see what a normal person would just look at. Forget about all the interests and all the filters that I'm looking at these things through. And so we're going to just take a look at a few of these, and then we're going to get a little further into Donovan. Before we do that, I want to show that Hodel, his profile was as a doctor, like he was a health official in LA after all. And, the crazy sadistic killer, obsessive and all this stuff that his son says that he is, the PR around Hodel was remarkable because they had all of this background of him being this upstanding official. By the time he's taken in for the Black Dahlia murder, that different story is starting to emerge. And I think that's when they spirit him off to China, it's because they know, that he's gone too far. And that if he's actually going to trial over incest with his daughter and things like that, that Hodel has now become a dramatic liability. And as I've said, these groups, and I often attribute it directly to deep state intelligence groups, but they know when someone's a liability, and they have no loyalty, literally. So if somebody's a liability, they're just out. If they can survive on their own, great. If they become an asset again, good. But they're not going to, there's no kind of family type loyalty in those groups at all. So let's go into the imagery. Oh, that's another one. This is a note that was the dead giveaway for Hodel. Hodel's son recognized that his dad liked to do this type of thing. And so when he went back and looked at the different messages, and you can always see this in like the 70s and 80s shows when they have someone who's doing these sprees and they send the cops these weird messages and they're always cut out newspaper things. Well, I guess this all comes from Hodel, actually. And remember, he worked at a newspaper when he was younger. So this is one of his notes to the cops after killing the Black Dahlia. He says, I will give up in Dahlia killing if I get 10 years. So he's saying, I'll turn myself in if you give me 10 years. Don't try to find me. This type of stuff. And that's what caused his son to be like, oh my God, this is exactly the kind of stuff he liked to do. He liked to cut up words and make, almost his art. So Hodel shows up as a real power force in the middle of all this. He's so smart with that incredible IQ, but he's also tapped in, remember, to a couple of things. One of them is the Human Betterment Foundation, which is an early eugenics group. And one of them, the other thing that he's really tapped into is this Caltech piece. So there's some kind of occult society operating in the background of both of those groups. It's very hard to identify exactly what group it is, but it's associated heavily with Mexican Aztec imagery. And also they seem to have to go to Mexico in order to perform the rituals and rites. So let's look at some of the imagery and strange marriages. 5 marriages now for Sue Lyon on this one. Here's one of the that's one of the occult-ish movies that she did, which is all about this tarot reader who sees these strange things happening and tries to save a blind man. There's a lot of tarot. There's another one called The Occult Factor, which I also think is very interesting. Here's one, Murder in a Blue World. More of the Sue Lyon after track in the 70s when the career has gone into a strange place, but she finds herself over and over. Remember what James Phillips was trying to do to her. He was trying to put her in kind of occult labeled films like Lilith and things like that. Well, here, that's what sort of happened. She got pushed off to the side and into these kind of bizarre B movies, but all about occult issues. It's almost like they couldn't leave her just out there without the signature. They needed the thread. And I want to say that this thing, they picked up on this exact same thing. This is an image of Sue Lyon going to court for divorce. It's the only shot of her mother, who was the ultimate stage mom in this, getting her out as a child model, first to JCPenney and then later directly to Hollywood. Here, and it is Tamar, of course, who will collaborate with the mother in order to get her the role in Stanley Kubrick's movie to make sure she got that audition. So that's the only shot of Sue Lyon's mom. For what it's worth, very interesting indeed. And of course, we can see even when she's getting divorced, she's barely 18. So very young all the way through. On the subject of her marriages, this is the most unusual part. Later, after that marriage, she will marry a criminal who's behind bars for robbery and murder. I kid you not. And the ceremony will take place. Let's see if I can. I found this from the newspaper, where she actually has to kiss him through the bars in order to make the ceremony complete. Think about that. This is a very unusual situation and seems to be another kind of lever in all this to keep her mouth shut. I find it quite fascinating. And when we think that just, her marriage here is in 1973, it's only 11 years after she rockets to worldwide stardom. And here she's marrying a prisoner and she is living in Denver as a cocktail waitress and doing volunteer work, and her career is just off at that point. It does restart again. And what happens is she marries this guy behind bars, and then he breaks out of jail, and he goes to visit her, and he gets caught, and they put him back in, and she gets a divorce. And what she's told, what they say to her in Hollywood terms is, you'll never work anywhere again. That's it. You're done. Again, a very unusual thread through her later life that doesn't really, you don't see it coming for this young star who, after all, not only does Lolita, which is a huge hit, but Night of the Iguana, Evel Knievel, and these other movies. Now, I want to mention another interesting thing about her, which is her first big role is not often talked about, but was on the Loretta Young show. And they did episodes inside of the show. And if you've ever seen the Loretta Young show, it's strange because it looks like Gigi Young. And her last name's Young, if you've ever seen the actress Loretta Young. And so Loretta Young plays these various roles, and she's playing a teacher that a student goes to and says this male teacher did inappropriate things with her. But the name of that show was called Alien Love. So again, our friend Lolita here is around marrying Blade Runner, the Blade Runner screenplay writer, and her first breakthrough role is Alien Love. It's just interesting, isn't it? I mean, even if it were just a coincidence, how very unusual it is. And the prisoner thing, before we're done with that, this character, he seemed to, basically she's married again for a very short period of time, But he basically is the last nail in her career coffin, because they look at that and they say, oh, you're going to get all kinds of bad press because you're marrying a prisoner. And so basically she becomes a pariah in any kind of legitimate Hollywood circles. So she's completely cast out, and you see her show up, like I said, in these unusual kind of astral roles, or roles that deal with mysticism in some fashion. So again, we're looking at some wave that follows her far after the actual op of the Lolita movie, which came directly out of the hotel activity. Hodel, that is. So let's read a little bit from this article. And this was such a breakthrough article, came out. One of them came out in 2020, and the last one, I think this one just came out, October 24th, 2020. And that one's called The Dark Side of Lolita by Sarah Weinman. It's quite good. There's a couple of things in here, actually, just to give you some idea of what was happening to her as a person. So much of the glamour and glitz was falling off, and there was this kind of person struggling behind the mask of all this to get through. And she didn't understand the trajectory that she'd been put on. When you look back over her life, there's no question that she felt she had been put through all of this as a result of her activity being in Lolita, but she could not figure out what the mechanism was. And she didn't maintain any kind of friendship going forward with Tamar, but Michelle Phillips did. Michelle Phillips, Tamar would go to her wedding and family events and stuff. She was her friend all the way through. So looking at that overhang of the influence, I think, there are a few interesting things that happened to Sue Lyon that, again, become very suspect. One is that while she's on a publicity tour for Lolita, her brother is found in Tijuana, Mexico, in a car with a drug overdose. So, again, I feel like there's so much control aspects around Sue Lyon's career. Then when she comes back after Night of the Iguana, which is shot in Mexico, she gets into a car accident while driving with her mother. And the mother, basically in pain, after the accident, commits suicide. So she's surrounded by a number of things that, basically take her down a different path. And what they were trying to do with her, whatever it was in the beginning, they were going to laud her as this mega star and introduce this whole kind of Lolita theme. And they did it initially, and it worked, but they decided for some reason they were going to throw her over the side. And it could be that she got wind that it was actually a plan. And later she would talk and say, I didn't agree with their plans for me. And it's not really spelled out what those plans were. My feeling is she knew that this was part of a society influencing a cult operation, and that she got away from it to the degree that she could. One of the weird things is that she thought she found somebody who was a soulmate in Donovan and was getting through these things. And then Donovan writes this Atlantis song because he's influenced by her and her love of mythology. And then a strange thing happens, which is Donovan doses her with LSD. And she completely never deals with him after that for a decade. And so that's the end of their relationship. So the one person she could have had something in common with, and they could have been, like two stars against the world type thing, this guy ends up giving her acid. So, and she has such a terrible time with that, a bad trip, that she can't ever speak to him again. And I found out that they did meet 10 years later and were kind of cordial to each other. But aside from that was it. And I think Donovan could fill in a lot of these blanks in terms of this part of the story. But anyway, let's catch up a little bit on what they were saying after she died. Sue Lyon, star of Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of the Nabokov novel Lolita, has died at the age of 73. The film To some, borderline pornography to others is a classic in the 60s pre-MPAA rating era, walking just up to the line of acceptability. They made a movie of Lolita. How did they make a movie of Lolita? Was the poster. And so that was the way to promote it. Dolores Lolita Hayes is 12 years old in the original novel. Lyon was 14 when cast and 16 when it was released in 1962. If all you knew about the story is the middle-aged man is a creep who preys upon his stepdaughter, Lyon may surprise you by not playing the role as a wide-eyed victim. Actually, it's an incredible performance for someone who had only done TV shows. She had done Dennis the Menace and Alien Love in the Loretta Young Show, and that's it. So Kubrick said she was 1 in a million, as I said. So she had a very special quality, a kind of charisma. What's also interesting is it seems obvious that she has inner interests, and in stories, if you compile enough of them together with a thread, it seems to me the mental illness in her family is a kind of psychic sensitivity, which in the era before, in the 30s and 20s, if you're psychic, you're not going to get anywhere because the society itself doesn't help. And they're going to think that you're crazy. A lot of people thought Casey was crazy, for example. If he wasn't surrounded by a kind of Christian community, I think they would have probably put him away. All right. Sue Ellen Lyon, born in Davenport, Iowa, had 5 marriages. First to Hampton Fancher, we talked about. And her second husband was Roland Harrison. This is another thing that gets very, very confusing because Roland Harrison was a football player for the San Diego Chargers who became a coach. And it's here that she had a daughter. Now, this is very interesting because, it seems everything with her is kind of contrarian. So she marries a prisoner, right? She marries a prisoner after this guy. But a biracial marriage in 1970, pretty frowned upon, although it did happen in society. And so she's taking all these moves almost as a passive aggressive way to shake off this whole system that's after her. And Harrison goes with her. They have kind of, at that point, it's sort of a low point for both of them. They go to Spain, and then she gets pregnant and he takes off. And what happens is it's just her and the daughter. So she's a single mom with her daughter, Nona. And her daughter, Nona, has come out after the fact to say that she had a lot of problems and, that she had this kind of depression, that she was bipolar and these types of things, and that she had waves, emotional spillover where she would just stay in bed for 2 months at a time. So whatever had happened to Sue, she had reached a kind of heavy depression by the time she has a daughter. And by the time the daughter is 12, she's having a lot of problems with her. It's not really explained what the nature of the problems are, but the general gist is the daughter goes to live in a group home and Sue can't handle raising a daughter. So she still sends money and things like that, but she's no longer directly involved. Now, another weird story in the middle of all this is she has a daughter and she's with this Harrison guy who then leaves once she has the baby. Then what happens is she adopts a 14-year-old boy. And it seems like somewhere in the stretch between when she let her daughter go, we don't even know his name. And I've looked through a lot of different books, but I find that very interesting. And as I said, I've spoken to people who are associated with Sue, and I've been trying to get more from them. But if we could, and of course, I've reached out to her daughter to speak to her as well. But that the adopted son, who's so off the record, if anyone has information about him, if you could send it to admin@darkjournalist.com, that would be outstanding, because I'd love to see it. But I think that we're getting into a period here where, her life has just kind of reached a certain place, and they have kind of used her in that Hollywood system. And it's kind of like that whole thing, like took her in and spit her out, and but she's the kind of aftermath of whatever this weird occult ritual around her career was about. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We're here in X Series episode 123. This is Sue Lyon, Female Targets, the Hollywood Occult Connection. It's a very, very deep and complex story, but around her, as I've said, the occult, Hodel, Alien Love, Blade Runner, like everywhere I turn in her life, she seems to be the puppet of these very unusual forces. And the motif that it seems to me they took from Lolita and that they've extended onward are the heart-shaped glasses. That is the motif I think they used for this occult connection. And, so many people, when it came out about Pizzagate and all these different things, instantly what happened was they tried to derail the Pizzagate story by having this actor go in and shoot the floor in the pizza parlor, which Pizzagate, the original thing, didn't have anything to do with any place. It was a series. What's so interesting about it for me is that it came from a series of letters of John Podesta and emails that were hacked by WikiLeaks. And all those emails were all the Tom DeLonge emails were in that same batch. So we're talking about, the UFO threat op and its development, and also Pizzagate, which was about human trafficking. And the idea was he was making all these different references to different types of pizza, and that was the steganography code for human trafficking and underage prostitution. What's interesting for me when I look at this now is that they were able to roll that, get rid of it. There's so many interesting ties in the Vicki Morgan story with her and Bloomingdale, and how he had bought this whole pizza chain and she was going to run 30% of it. So there's a whole thread there about intel agencies and the mafia using pizza places. So the idea that they were using this code, Pizzagate code, makes perfect sense. In fact, there's tons and tons of evidence that they did that, but they were able to whitewash it because they were able to, kind of use this Q sideshow type stuff in order to, the media embraced the Q thing by reporting on it so much, pumped it up, and then used it as a battering ram against anyone who brought up anything that was controversial in nature. They'd say, oh, you're a Q person, you're into Pizzagate. But my point is that this idea about Pizzagate was a motif. And in fact, those are the types of things that are very revealing. And when they get really, when the media goes after it, that they're running scared, just like with the UFO threat stuff right now. Okay. Nona, who is her daughter, she has a book that she'll put out. I'm not sure when it's going to come out. It's called Lolita's Daughter. And so in 2013, she put out this intro about it. The book never came out, but I would be interested if it ever does. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Nona's life began as a fairy tale. She was the daughter of a famous actress, Sue Lyon, of Lolita fame, and a football player, Roland Harrison. Her father was absent for most of her childhood. Being a biracial child, she had questions at a very early age why she looked so different from her blonde-haired, blue-eyed mother. But Nona's upbringing was anything but normal. Her mother was diagnosed with bipolar manic depressive disorder before Nona was born. At times, her mother would be bedridden for months, and Nona the caretaker in the home. These are those weird depressions where she would just hang out in bed. Nona was kicked out of her house. By the age of 13, she was taken to a halfway house. That same year, her mother placed her in an insane asylum where she stayed for almost 3 months. That kind of betrayal by her mother, a woman she once idolized, broke Nona's spirit in a way which would take years to recover from. Nona currently lives in Los Angeles. So Sue was not able, for some reason, by the time she gets to this later period in her life, she's not able to raise the daughter, and she's being further destabilized by being a mom, and for some reason, she ends up putting her own child in an insane asylum. And as I said, somewhere in there, this other child who was adopted, I don't even know what happens to him. Either the adoption is undone or he's just is transferred to another parent. But I think all of those things, all of those pieces are interesting. This is the original poster. So interesting and ahead of its time in a way. I mean, you might think of something, this almost looks like a movie poster from the 80s. That's 1962. These people, the social engineers on this, really had a plan, and they even, I think, had their graphics down. But this one, definitely remarkable. Just, you know, the fact of it. And what it did was it brought into the culture all these different influences that were very taboo beforehand. And the pornography code would get loosened up. As a matter of fact, a year after this, the pornography code got loosened up. And in October, before the movie came out, they loosened up all these rules about what you could show in a film. So it seems like there was some kind of collusion on a deep level about how the society was going to change and where they were going to move it to. And I think, again, it's the activity of a dedicated group trying to do something on a mass level. And I think that some of the tentacles of that movement go directly back to Hodel, which is why it's his daughter that's directly involved with moving Sue and Michelle Phillips into the role. Very interesting indeed. Later, Richard Burton shows up a few times in these types of activities. One of the things that I found out when I looked for parallels, and I found parallels in other child stars, Mackenzie Phillips, of course, shows up. And there's another thing about Mackenzie Phillips and her dad, John Phillips, as she revealed, had an actual sexual relationship. So there's a thread there. Tatum O'Neal was another one. And the story around The Exorcist and Linda Blair, again, you've got that same thing like when they did this movie, Lolita, where they said they did a casting call for 800 different women to try out for it, different girls. And when they did The Exorcist, they used that same number, 800, which I found interesting. And in looking at the second part of The Exorcist, which is the less successful movie, you know, the original Exorcist is a huge hit. The Exorcist 2 is a bomb. But again, it's Richard Burton in that role being, you know, this kind of love interest after the fact of that original success stardom. And in that case, it's Linda Blair who played Reagan. So I think that there is a theme there. And it's so interesting to me to read Sue's comments about Richard Burton, because she said it was hard to be around him because he just reeked of alcohol. And by the way, I think Burton is a fantastic actor, unbelievable. But we have to understand like the level that these people are operating on. A lot of them are very heavily addicted, and they're in kind of a drug daze or an alcohol daze, whatever it is. Musicians, high-powered actors, you know, and all the rest of it. But it's much easier, I think, to use them from an occult point of view or esoteric perspective for a particular thing. If they're in that state, they're much more influenceable. Okay, a couple of examples. You know, you're going to see this, and the Miley Cyrus. I have so many examples on this. I could sit here all night with Paris Hilton and Brittany and everyone else using these glasses. But the glasses, I believe, as the motif, really get us somewhere in looking at this. And, you know, needing to understand why that was the image. Well, they needed something as a tie-over after the fact. And by the way, you know, if somebody has a different kind of fashion vision or whatever it is, you know, and people going really wild with looking a particular way, that's not what I'm talking about. And it's not about picking somebody out because they're wearing heart-shaped glasses. It is looking at a deeper level for the symbolism behind what is being launched in a certain period. Tons of people do weird fashion. It doesn't mean anything. It's just some personal statement. So what we're looking for is something very specific. It's a definite signature. This is one of the only pictures of Sue with Nona. And it's a little while after this that she'll let go of her. I would think maybe this is late 70s. I'd say about I think it's about 1980. And we can see Sue and her look is changing rather dramatically. And she's kind of dropping the glamour mask and just being, you know, a very straight ahead 70s kind of woman. A far cry from the 60s sex pot. The Dark Side of Lolita. Sue Lyon was 14 when she starred in the film. Now, in 1996, following the announcement of Adrian Lyon's new film adaptation of Lolita, so they redid it in 96, and there was an earthquake going on back there with Sue. So Lyon, the star of Kubrick's 62 film, broke many years of silence. And she actually was a year younger than the new Lolita, who was 15. And what she says, and I think it's so powerful, and it echoes across the era, if we think about it, my destruction as a person dates from that movie. That's so interesting to consider. She knows that she's been destroyed, one, and she knows that it was the movie that did it. Lolita made Lyon a star. It was also the beginning of an undoing similar to the one of Nabokov's Nymphette in Jaws, the actual character. So she sort of starts to embody the character. Her future includes decades of mental instability, 5 marriages, a child she would end up abandoning, and protracted physical decline, culminating in her death at the age of 73 in 2019. Though Lyon credited the early stardom for her destruction, it's long been rumored that what occurred during filming and what broke her was a sexual relationship with the film's producer, James B. Harris. If Lyon's destruction began with Lolita, was it possible a single individual could have caused this damage? This is again why Harris, comes into the picture as being important, and he seems to be the bridge that pulls over Kubrick into, this kind of more occult side of things. And I think I can back that up with the fact that they were in the Army together when they put this production company together, which I think is important because they had that kind of deep code with each other. If you look at their letters, they're very serious back and forth. And it seems to me that it's Harris who's doing all the uncanny, the strange activity and enacting the book Lolita in this case. Whereas it's Kubrick who's playing a very straight angle on this. And he almost seems to be trying to tell the society something while he's directing. For example, in A Space Odyssey, he is basically telling us and warning us about AI dramatically. And there's tons of occult symbolism in the different things from The Shining to Eyes Wide Shut, that it gives me the impression that Kubrick actually is trying to break that wall between the public and the people who are the plotters behind the scenes that know what's going on. So let's go a little further with this article because it was a huge breakthrough. And I think it put Phillips in the hot seat, and they still don't know what to do with this guy because he's out there. He has all these accolades and things, and we have this big cancel culture thing. But they've kind of gone around him, except for this article. They've pretty much left him alone. And I'm not saying it would be so great if they went after him, for example, but I'm just saying to get the record right, in a way, they have to. Coincidentally, weeks earlier, Lyon's mother had discovered a copy of the novel Lolita in Lyon's bedroom. She and Michelle Phillips had taken turns reading from Lolita. "Take that back to your house," Lyon's mother said to Phillips. "Never bring that book back here again." Phillips did as she was told. This is the weirdness about it. Again, getting back to that thrust of Tamar giving them this heads up that Lolita is important. Get your head wrapped around it. In a few years, there's going to be a movie of it, and one of you two are going to be basically a cult selected to be in that part. And as I said in her last interview, Tamar said, no, it wasn't supposed to be Sue Lyon. It was supposed to be Michelle Phillips, which is strange. It's a strange thing for her to say. It's kind of her project. What she was doing was putting them both out there for the role. And it got turned back on her when Kubrick was like, "I want Sue Lyon." Kubrick told Look magazine of Lyon, even in the way she walked in for her interviews and casually sat down, walked out, she was cool and non-giggly. She was enigmatic without being dull, and she could keep people guessing about how much Lolita knew about life. So he's picking up on her as an actress, and in fact tried for the first couple of years to really get her across as an actress. Lyon got the part 2 months after her 14th birthday, flew to London in the fall of 60 for filming, which lasted well into the spring of 1961. Largely, she kept to herself, Kubrick, and Harris's designs. They didn't want the paparazzi finding out anything about her, but the photographers were not deterred. And that goes to what we were saying about how the press was so tightly controlled around Lyon. To me, it's a huge red flag that whatever they're trying to do, they need her to be completely contained. That's a shot of Kubrick with Lyon, giving her lines and really working with her. Apparently, he was a great director to work with and didn't rely on shock tactics and things of this nature, but really could get into the head of who he was working with. Within a few days of filming, in what was intended as a joke, Lyon sent Harris a letter purporting to give him permission to attain the position of exclusive superintendent of the girls' district, Elstree School. And what happens is there are all these kind of cute notes that are on the record between those two, and it's the only actual proof that they had an affair. But Phillips and others have gone on the record saying that happened. So once Phillips gives the heads up to this writer that no, she did have an affair with her at 14, the article goes on. The age of consent in England was 16 at the time and 18 in California. If events happened as Phillips described them to me, Lyon would have been 14 and Harris 32, and she was under contract to Kubrick Harris for 6 more years. And then she goes on in that article about the different husbands and things. That is the Hampton husband who did the whole Blade Runner script, and he's the guy that I think, and it'd be interesting if someone could get that to him and just say, ask him the question point blank. Did these guys try to pay you off to marry her? Because, you got out of there really quick, and it seems to make sense with the type of character that you said you were like at the time. So she's talking about calling up this husband, and she says, when I asked him about Lyon's involvement with Harris, Fancher paused. I shouldn't say anything because he's around, and these days, my God, it was weird enough then, so I don't have anything to say about that. So obviously he knows, and he's keeping that. He doesn't want to be the one who goes on the record saying, yeah, but he obviously knows. So it's an open secret. And remember, open secrets, they're like stealth archives. We know that it's true. It's almost like the JFK assassination files. We know that the files are there, but we can't get at them because the CIA is sitting on them. Now, what's interesting, speaking of JFK, there's 2 weird things about JFK in this. One is that Sue Lyon uses the same hairdresser and fashion designer as JFK, as JFK's wife, Jackie, as Jackie O. So that is kind of interesting. But what really gets me is that July 14th, 1962 column by Dorothy Kilgallen, ring a bell on the Kennedy side, carried the headlines Lolita virus catching for Sue Lyon. The item reads, Sue Lyon, the pretty star of Lolita, has bowled over her producer, James Harris, her age 16. According to her studio, and a man of James Harris is 33. She prefers the company of mature men, and James may be her cup of tea. He's a little older. When she's a little older and he decides to properly court her. This is really interesting to me because, Kilgallen actually drives this story of Harris being involved with Lyons. And she does it in a classy way where she doesn't directly accuse him, but she's going right around the whole thing. And Kilgallen would get herself into such trouble around the Kennedy matter that by 1966, 3 years later, she's bumped off. When Kilgallen's item ran, Lyon had been 16 for a mere 4 days. And according to Michelle Phillips, had already lost her virginity at 14 to Harris. So, basically this thread goes through and it's brought up and it becomes that very difficult situation for Harris, the producer. So we've got a lot of weird things about Lyon that have never been brought out and people are still afraid to bring out. But I'll tell you, it's the occult side of the story, which is, in my opinion, really the piece that has not been brought forward. And this is the part that once we find Hodel involved, that we can track back through these influences. And then they talk about her being involved in these kind of noir movies. And Sue's career persisted through Night of the Iguana, directed by John Huston. Who was the best friend of Hodel? It was John Huston, who molested Tamar, Hodel's daughter, according to Tamar, John Huston. So here they make this star Lolita, and who do they hand her over to in Night of the Iguana? John Huston. So that kind of completes the loop for the first part of what they were doing. And what's interesting is the next movie they do her in is Seven Women, which is directed the last movie of John Ford, who's also an incredibly huge producer. So she's working with the cream of the crop, Kubrick, Ford, and Huston. I mean, you know, that's a launch. So her meteoric rise and fall is not a traditional, oh, she got too big for her britches and then disintegrated into drugs. It seems more that she was designed for a particular thing and they decided somehow not to do it with her, or they couldn't do it with her. And so this is where it went. And then finally, a year later, Lyon confused Hollywood with a sudden marriage to Gary Cotton, who was serving time in a Colorado prison for bank robbery and second-degree murder. And this is weird, too, because somebody had kind of moved the situation into place. Here she is in Denver, and she's a cocktail waitress, and she ends up going to this prison and participating in some prison event. And that's where she meets him. And then she falls madly in love with this prisoner. And that's what destroys her career. So I would say that the motifs around Lyon suggest that it's been designed to go a particular way. And they wanted certain types of information and feedback from what would happen if she did certain things. Now, and in the case of marrying the prisoner, it's strange. Now, a couple of interesting background facts there is there's a cult around in that period which was called Synanon. And she became a big spokesman for Synanon from 67 through 70. And this is all very interesting to me because Synanon is an early prototype for those types of encounter groups, and you hear kind of the cleaned up versions of those groups now. It'd be like the Forum and some of these other ones. And but Synanon, again, you get that Anon piece, just like the QAnon thing after the fact, and before it, Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. And it, supposedly the idea was these guys were going to clean up people who were heroin addicts, in that you couldn't really clean up heroin addicts with traditional AA and things like that. And so that these people developed their own method, and then they became their own bizarre version and cult. Now, because there were a lot of things like Scientology and different types of groups that would go out and kind of capture different interests, you know, so they would be, if you're really interested in this type of thing, or if you're anti-society, this group would take you in. And in this case, there's a movie made about Synanon in 1965 with major stars in it. Rita Moreno's in it. And it goes through exactly what it's all about. Now, I think it basically portrays it in a favorable fashion, which is getting people off drugs. But what would happen is that whole thing would disintegrate. And again, they went into this whole thing about choosing who should marry who. And one of the key things that they would do when you started in the cult is shave your head. And so there are pictures of her shaving her head and being kind of into this. So there's no trace that she was ever involved with heroin. But there's something about Lyon and Synanon and then the gradual disintegration of her career after the fact, which is also interesting because, again, you have around her various levels of control. And then when you read about her, there's an event in 1968 that she shows up at. There's a little gossip column read in it. And it says that she shows up there with her, like, psychiatrist who has a great sense of humor. But who goes walking around with their psychiatrist to nightclub events and things like that? So very heavy duty control on Lolita from what they were trying to do with her. And the threads are just remarkable when we get into it, because when we look at what was happening with Michelle Phillips and John Phillips and all the things that she went through, well, Michelle Phillips ended up going through some dramatic scandals herself in relation to Mackenzie and John and all the rest of it. And aside from just, as I said, the salacious nature of these things, isn't it interesting that Lolita is a story about a stepfather hitting on his stepdaughter, in essence? And, in the case of Michelle Phillips, it is the daughter and John Phillips having a relationship. And again, the John Huston thing, those threads are there in his portrayals in those movies. So we have some major thread, and it all seems to creep back from this period going on in the 30s and 40s, where we have our friend Hodel operating in the middle of this kind of theater, occult theater, using Man Ray and surreal art. And then an actress ends up dismembered in this fashion of one of Man Ray's paintings, and the footprints lead back to Hodel, and that's the whole Black Dahlia case. So for me, now looking at this, I think that we have a definite signature that there's an occult agency at work in relation to this, and we can't, we're not saying CIA and we're not saying the FBI. This is a group that really doesn't have a name that we know of in the public, but it seems to surface at different times, and it seems to surface through a number of these different media operations, and it selects certain types of individuals. Look at how careful they had to be to select Sue Lyon. They had to, she was born in Iowa after all. Somehow, through her father's death and through a number of different circumstances, she gets led directly into Hollywood. But at the same time, Michelle Phillips, her dad's a bartender in Buffalo. And then, after the mother dies, he's back out there to California, and he becomes a corrections officer. And then he decides, oh, you know what? I'm going to Mexico, and I'm going to get this great education. And he takes Michelle and all the rest. So we have this kind of, somebody is moving these people around like chess pieces on a board, because it needs them to be positioned in such and such a place. And the way that it's being positioned, it doesn't leave itself to happenstance, to chance. They definitely are being rounded up. And it seems like a kind of a supernatural rounding up. And that's the thing that I think we need to, whether we're looking at Sue Lyon's story or the threads around that story that go in to the 70s and take us up to 2022. I think when we look at Sue Lyon's story, she's somebody who's caught in the middle of all that magnetic motion, and she doesn't seem to know where it's coming from. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. We're going deep here tonight, female targets and Sue Lyon, just absolutely fascinating. And for me, this is a particularly interesting case with Sue, because in X Series 123, for this, we're looking at somebody who connects back through this entire Hodel ordeal, and Hodel being deeply connected to hypnosis and surgery. And, he's one of these people who represents a thread all the way back through Caltech and the Human Betterment Foundation. So we also don't know, it's almost like the thread that he comes in on is so unusual, because, as I said, his mother being a dentist in 1900 and his dad wanting to flee to America, and that they land in Pasadena, and that Caltech's in Pasadena. And so there's so many things, and I speak a lot about X geography very often, and we try to put some things on the map, like Moon, Pennsylvania, or the Hot Zone. Pasadena is one of those pieces that isn't pointed out in traditional, we hear so much about, Groom Lake, Area 51, and there's a number of different things that I think exist in alternative research that are places to go for our imaginations to go, Skinwalker Ranch and all the rest. But they're kind of like dead end places. And the actual geography, when you get into it, is obscure. And it requires a different kind of mentality in order to get ourselves lined up around what was it that took place. But if you go to Pasadena at a certain point, you can find Hodel, Einstein, there's so many people interactive there, Terman, that you start to see that these areas have been targeted for definite purposes. And Theosophy itself sent so many of its efforts out to the West Coast, to California. And in Ojai, of course, all the Krishnamurti activity. And what I think when we look back at it, we see Annie Besant and what she was trying to do as part of Theosophy was create in the heart of California this new thought, a new colony, and I think so many spiritual seeds were sown there and so many of them unraveled that what we got out of it basically was the explosion of consciousness around the 1960s. And that had to be directed and kind of derailed. And one of the interesting things in Sue's background that I find so interesting is that, one of the main things that they did there was when she was trusting Donovan so much and her life was kind of getting back on track, and then he doses her, it's that kind of betrayal piece that you see as a motif in her life. And what's interesting is when we look at Michelle Phillips, there's a very unusual story about Michelle and her saying, we need to go to this Caribbean island in the hot zone. And so they're in cold New York and they take off there. They don't have a lot of money and they're playing in some hotel. And then Mama Cass comes down and she has all this acid she brings with her. And this is early. This is like 1964, before acid was really in circulation. And they become such a menace on that island that the governor of the island, because his son is hanging out with Michelle Phillips and John Phillips and the mamas and the papas, wants to get them out, get off the island. And this is very interesting to me for a lot of reasons. But what is particularly interesting is that they don't have any money to get out. So they're in a real conundrum. And so they have $50 left. And she says, let's go to the casino. And they take their last $50 and she plays in the casino and she plays these incredible games of dice. And she wins $3,000. In 1964, that's like winning $30,000. And they have all the money to go back to New York with. And they do. And when they land in New York, they write, All the Leaves Are Brown and these songs. And then they go right from there and decide, we're going to drive to California. And they drive to California. They go to Lou Adler and boom, they instantly become a success overnight. And then they don't even have to play clubs or anything. Instantly the record company is like, let's get the Hollywood Bowl for you guys. So that incredible fast track that Michelle Phillips is set up on, again, there's a supernatural occult aspect, because if she hadn't been able to, one, pick out that island for them to go to, and then for them to get off of it, they would have basically been marooned. And so it's her, again, taking that initiative and going in with this special power that she has and turning that $50 into $3,000. There's something strange about that whole story. And I think that there's a lot of overhang of that Laurel Canyon research that has never quite been sussed out properly. And we've opened things up around Laurel Canyon. We're going to continue to do it. What's interesting is this first husband of Sue Lyon that we were describing earlier, who wrote Blade Runner. This guy was deep in Laurel Canyon, that whole period where he's dating Terry Garr before he meets her. So he comes out of that Laurel Canyon. Now, so many people would make that their home in the 60s, and it became that center. And we know that, so many of the amazing, powerful 60s musicians and actors in the 60s and 70s, that would be kind of the central core place. So, there's no question that there's an actual supernatural guidance level to this because of the stories hang out there appropriate like this. Everyone, you're watching the X series. This is X series 123. We're going deep on Sue Lyon and the Hodel connection with Hollywood Occult. Female targets. This is part 3 of female targets. Part 1, of course, we had Vicki Morgan, and Vicki Morgan was such an interesting story because she was at this interface between high-powered Washington elite and Hollywood occult, and there were connections directly from the Vicki Morgan story to Michelle Phillips and the financiers that were just rolling in and coming in from Europe and financing these movies. And a lot of the same names come up over and over again, too, in the actor circles, like Warren Beatty, for example. And, of course, we can't forget Shirley MacLaine is his sister. So I think when we look at Hollywood and a lot of the influences around it, we can say there's big money involved, there's big politics involved, but there's an unseen occult aspect that's operating there in the background. And all the way through the Black Dahlia murders and Tamar's influence on Sue Lyon, I think that we're looking in Polanski's, and that whole trajectory of what happened with him in relation to this, and then the fact of his movies, and then what happens to him eventually, of course, is he gets into all kinds of trouble because he's involved with an underage girl. So there's a motif operational there. It's almost like you have to be part of that initiatory group in that secret society, and it has something to do with this underage prostitution. What I would say is that some of the best places to see that influence are in those movies. And that's what I think is so fascinating when we get into this, that we're looking at a history that they couldn't really get at in that period. And this is what I see in relation to things right now, that we're looking at an image, a kind of a mirror image that reflects back at you what you want to see. And what we're trying to do is get a handle, whether it's major situations like the Ukraine war or the COVID op, or the different things that we're looking at, the UFO threat op. Actually seeing what they're doing is totally different. And what they do in the control of the media and the way that they roll things out is to basically play with the suggestible part of your unconscious. But if we suddenly, taking our cue from the mystery schools and some of the things that are left, suddenly, if we're aware on that level, then there's the kind of 100th monkey thing that happens. And it works basically like this. If somebody in some secret location has seen the face of an alien that they keep in storage or whatever, then we all have on a subconscious level. So what we're looking at is our own ability to tap into that unconscious level. And that doesn't require, a psychiatric degree. It just requires use, acknowledgement of that intuitive center and working beyond the surface level. So many people in the last couple of months have been walking around, and I'll use the Ukraine thing because it's such a current example. But that's all programming. I mean, yes, the Ukraine, leader got into all these speeches and Ukraine got attacked, but the war on the ground is real to those people, but the reasons for what's happening there and the way that they're trying to spin it and the things that are going on in relation to it remind me very much of how they portrayed 9/11 here. When 9/11 happened, Bush was supposed to be this incredible superhero, and the terrorists were supposed to be these guys in caves that were directing this thing. And these guys in caves had, by the way, worked for our own CIA previously. Those things are just facts on the record. So the stories are so hard to believe when you break them down that they could only survive if they weren't scrutinized, one, and two, if they operate in this field of suggestibility, which is what the media is. So that's why when I speak about dark journalism, it's crucial. And we're in a place where, we need to engage that level of reality and awareness, because the ability to hit us with entrainment on these stories, whether, we see so many stories of political figures or stars who die under suspicious circumstances. And we have to be able to say no, just like when the wave of holistic doctor deaths happened just before the COVID op. And so many people were, trying to blow it off and not cover it by saying, oh, no, that's something that, the Q people are saying. I mean, it has nothing to do with Q. Q was a weird invention somewhere along the line that was a consolidation of all these different conspiracy theories that were pre-existing. The stuff was already there, and they were trying to make it a clearinghouse, a portal for all that stuff. And so when we look at that, the whole idea behind the creation of that, regardless of who created it, could really just be that somebody wanted a scapegoat so that they could pump it up and say, aha, anytime you mention anything, you're a Q person, right? And so when we get to that level, we can see that we can't jump in when anonymous things are given out there to us. They might even sprinkle in a few different truths, but the manipulation en masse of this community around the alternative research side, heavy duty manipulation over the past 5 years, more than I've ever seen. And the latest incarnation of that being the CIA UFO threat thing. And now I'm a CIA contactee. Come, let me give you the truth. And the whole joke around the people that they're rolling out in relation to it. Even the DeLong thing is a little bit, has that MK Ultra tinge to it of some weird bobo that they're rolling out to move the story. That I think when we get into it, and this is why I say the rules of dark journalism work like this, that there's an official story, and that's the official story. 8 guys in a cave and instructed 19 guys with box cutters to take down the world's most impressive air defense system. That's the official story. And the official story is there to protect the institutions. The secondary story is when intelligent people, writers, professors, and others, and just everyday average people see through it and start to report on it and say, no, this is wrong, that's wrong. And so the secondary story is very often called the conspiracy theory by the media because they don't want anyone to go there. And the third level is junk conspiracy, and that is in 9/11. Oh, they didn't use any planes. When I throw in a junk conspiracy, it's so crazy, it's so wild that everyone goes, oh, I have to get away from that and go back to the official version, because what they do is they co-opt the second level of research with this third level junk conspiracy. And we see junk conspiracy throughout. So when you get around the UFO field, we see it all the time. The junk conspiracy piece, there are bluebirds talking to this guy and giving him intel and stuff. There's always junk conspiracy. But the idea is the same people who are driving the junk conspiracy are from the official level trying to get the secondary level off their back and ginning up a crazy conspiracy theory that they can snowball in together. So we have to keep those rules of dark journalism in mind when we get around areas that are sensitive, like movements, political movements now and in the past. But stories, too, of people's lives, because those stories have been engineered and somebody has sitting down and crafted that narrative. Oh, so-and-so, Lee Oswald was a disgruntled communist and he wanted to kill Kennedy. I mean, just really bad stories and things that don't have, Sirhan. Oh, he was misguided and his life wasn't going anywhere. I mean, he was 24 years old. I mean, you have plenty of time to make your life go somewhere when you're 24. Mark David Chapman. Oh, he resented a comment. He resented the Beatles. These things really just 1 inch deep into examination, they fall apart. The Batman shooter is another great case. So we have to be able to say at a certain level, a number of these things don't hold up. And so when we know that we're being propagandized, like the Zelensky case or the UFO threat, then we take it to a different level and we say, no, I'm looking at this through a different lens. I'm looking at it, for me, through dark journalism. And I see the manipulation coming in and the influence thereof. And in a few weeks after they started off like that, you'll see people arguing with the talking points that they've been programmed into. And what it is they understand the suggestibility of the unconscious of an individual. It's the same thing that the mystery schools try to put forward with, through anthroposophy and theosophy and the Gurdjieff work. Gurdjieff said that what they were looking at in the 1917 war, the thing that they were trying to figure out is that everyone was brainwashed. That's 1917. So now they have incredible, forget TV. They've got incredible, your smartphone is brainwashing you 24/7 as you walk around. So, we take things into a different place. We have to adopt that awareness level. And we're going to encounter people who are fueled by the false stories. And so we have to be ready for those confrontations. But on a media level, we don't have to restrain ourselves. We can point out the truth, and we have that ability. Just like with the incredible censorship that's going on, we have the ability right now to call it out. And so we should be seizing these opportunities. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is X Series 123. It's Sue Lyon, Female Targets, Hollywood Occult. And we'll be going deep on the influences around her, including Kubrick and Hodel associated with the Black Dahlia murder. I want to remind everyone to go to the darkjournalist.com website and sign up for our newsletter. Now, basically, it's great if you guys can support the show and subscribe and get on board that way. But even if you can't, make sure that you're on that newsletter list. That's a free newsletter, and you're going to want to be counted with the incredible levels of social censorship that we've been seeing. It's just gone off the rails for me. And, I feel like we're in that kind of a place where we need that direct pipeline just in case they decide it's blackout time. And I also want to remind you that we have some incredible X series episodes, interviews, and events all coming up. That's all through the newsletter. So that's the best way to find us. Of course, we have a Telegram account that's at Real Dark Journalist. I've adopted that as a new one in case they shut down our Twitter account. So that's another thing. If you want to mail something to us, some people said they want to subscribe by mail. It's 1770 Dark Journalist Avenue. No, 1770 Massachusetts Avenue, number 238, Cambridge, 02140. I'll say that again. Dark Journalist, 1770 Massachusetts Avenue, number 238, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 02140. Lovely Harvard Square. I have a view over here of Avi Loeb's astrophysics lab. So those guys probably feel pretty bad that I'm so close to their operation because it's pretty easy for me to watch the comings and goings, shall we say. No, I do want to say that the Galileo project is another one of these pieces. And here's the op on that. And if you don't know what Galileo project is, it's Avi Loeb is a big astrophysicist over here at Harvard. And he came out of basically the Israeli CIA, so he's kind of an interesting guy anyway, but he was the first Harvard professor that they let out to say like, oh, there's alien worlds beyond our own. And John Mack was a Harvard professor who I knew, or I had the opportunity to speak with several times. And I had a friend who worked for him. But he was a psychiatrist over there at Harvard, and they wanted to take away his tenure and everything. They went after him viciously because he talked about people who had alien encounters and abductions and everything else. So this guy Loeb getting a green light to do it, you knew was something. But what he was saying was that Oumuamua came into our solar system. So that was a large stone structure that was just wandering around. And he said, that's definitely an AI spaceship. And we need to get our AI jacked up so we can interact with it. And so one of those UFO ops that they have, of course, they have the threat op where the world is under attack. And that's the whole Lou Mellon op. Oh, the UFOs are coming for us. We need all this money and control and emergency powers. That's where those guys are going. But the Galileo project is a little bit different, and that's what they work on over here. And that one is basically that this AI is trying to communicate with us, and when we get our AI up to snuff, it'll communicate back and forth, and they can tell us what we need to do. And I guarantee what they're planning to do is have that Oumuamua object say, "Control the environment. You need a carbon tax on everyone." That's where they're going. So it's like a weird, our ancestor elders are out there in space. But that one started off with a lot of interesting scientists at first, and I thought they're going to get something good is going to come out of this. And then it got layered and stacked with CIA people. And then Lou and Mellon, Chris Mellon got on board, and that was the end of that. So that of anything good coming out of that. So that's going to be a CIA operation about AI in space. And then the basic Lou one that they're trying to do, which is faltering because he's doing such a poor job, that's the one where they're coming out and saying the UFOs are coming to get us. And there's a big threat. And watch that report that's coming out in 6 months. Oh, I can't wait till that thing comes out. As if the government ever gives you the truth about these things. But the best thing that they're doing, and you can't make this stuff up, is having the CIA agents trot out and say that they are abductees and they're getting their own messages from the aliens now. But this is interesting. This is new. And I think that we have to really keep our eyes on the prize, on where this is going. Now, ordinarily in this section of the program, I'd be taking your questions. And so we're not doing questions tonight because we don't have Miss Olivia because she has a stomach flu. But she'll be back next week and she's fine. But I am going to just do some shout outs for everybody. And then we're going to say goodnight because it's just been a terrific night of giving you the female targets info. And it's great to be here. Thank you, Kat, for running the show out there. I appreciate it. In the ideas room, the ideas room is looking great. I'll highlight a couple of comments. They never give us the truth about anything they can't. Exactly. Gypsy Moon has it. See, now, why don't people like, say, George Knapp get that? A cult fan. He's out there. It's great to see you. Great show. I appreciate it. I'm going to use the highlighter, everyone. There's Kat. It's great to see you. Blue Man. Kate's out there. It's great to see you, Kate. Brandy Renee. Amazing how we all end up paying for scientists to communicate with a rock. That's pretty good. Mighty fine, DJ. I carved on a Oumuamua. Excellent. Ivan Langley, thank you very much, sir. Much obliged. Alien scientists, the man, the myth. I'd love to introduce you guys to some of my scientist friends in Cambridge. Well, you sure they want to meet us? I mean, think about that. Think carefully about who you want to introduce them to. Of course, we'd love to meet anyone. Najat, it's great to see you out there. Fantastic. Carlos, excellent crew out there tonight in the ideas room. Avishai, sum it all up. Yeah, good point. Miguel, hi-ho. Hi-ho back. How's Yoko Ono doing? Are you going to get Yoko Ono on the show? I'm counting on you. I would love to have Yoko Ono on the show. I really would. Unbelievable questions that I have for her and Atlantis and the amazing things, of course, that she and John were engaged in on that front. So there's a story that was never really been told, except maybe a little on this show. It's a fantastic group here tonight. A lot of familiar faces. Great comments, too. Thank you so much. The guys in black uniforms are a secret space program. Yeah. Well, I have an episode coming up about the Space Force and its derailment. So you may appreciate that one coming up. Shamanus Anamkara, appreciate your great work. Thank you. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it very much. Whew, a great crew out there tonight. And Nick Malone. Yeah, okay, I got it. That's great. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for being out there. Jimi Hendrix did a song about Atlantis as well. I'm trying to think of what that is. I think you got me on that one. You're going to have to inform me what the name of that one is. I know he's got I'm the Third Rock from the Sun or something. His stuff is fantastic. And of course, he was a very plugged in guy. If you want Hindu gods on one hand, or just incredible. And I don't think anyone ever really touched him as a guitar player. As far as guitar playing goes, forget it. Donovan. Yeah, Donovan comes up as a very interesting and unusual character. And I guess that thread kind of goes from Donovan to T-Rex as far as those, having an impact on society. Because it's just a guy with a guitar. And it's kind of remarkable to me that someone can have that much power just doing really acoustic songs. It's really excellent. Dark Side of the Moon. There's a lot of things there. There are things going on in relation to the moon program. And this is the amazing thing. Of course, we haven't been to the moon since 1972, as we know. And this is very interesting because when we look at it, you say, why wouldn't they go back in 50 years? Well, when Mike Pence was VP, he headed up the Space Council, and he said, we're going back in 2025. And everyone was like, all right, you have Space Force and all the rest of it, the attempt to get the UFO file back under presidential Trump control. All right, we're going. Then what happened? Well, Biden gets in and says, you know what, hold up. We're actually not going back to the moon that fast. And NASA's like, well, it might be more like later in the decade, maybe 2028, 2030. In the meantime, these guys are knocking it out of the park with plans to go to Mars and SpaceX and all the rest of it. And SpaceX is giving help to the, this Ukraine space program, saying, hey, I'm going to give you Starlink to fight your war. I mean, did we elect a space president? What's going on there? Alien scientist. John Lear passed away. Yes, he just passed away. It's remarkable. And he had a lot of impact. He told a lot of wild stories, let's face it. But he was one of those people, he's involved deeply in the Bob Lazar piece. And you can't have the Bob Lazar piece without the John Lear piece. But his dad, of course, created the Learjet. So he knew a lot. And those elders around this stuff are very important. Stanton Friedman was someone in that field who understood things on the UFO side. And instead, what's happening is we're losing some of these guys, and they're getting replaced with Corbells and the circus people and Elizondo and people who want to create like this violent war thing with UFOs and make money from it. So we're in a kind of a low, if there's a low ebb on the UFO thing, this is it. But we have that ability to kind of split off and create something totally unique and new with that. And Lear, man, he was controversial, but something else. Really, really interesting guy. And this year we've already lost, the incredible Carmen Bolter, remarkable loss, great person, and I really respected her and the work that she did. And Jordan, of course, just amazing. It's remarkable, and we have to remember that. I remember, at a certain point, this is very interesting, just looking at the work that I've done, at a certain point, my calendar was filled up with Jim Mars, Stanton Friedman, Carmen Bolter, and those guys have all moved into a different place, and their work, the essence of their works, is still here with us. But I say to myself, my God, are we doing enough with the great people that we have? And, this is the important thing, and it's a big key with dark journalism, which is I want to have that conversation. And so I'm thinking about the spring being Collaborate Spring. And I want to collaborate with all the great voices that we have, and I'm going to bring them on the show, and some new ones too, and really getting people out and hardcore into the work, because right now humanity needs that window more than ever, and this is the time, and this is the place, and we are the people. I mean, there's no way around it. And can you imagine a society under more pressure than post-COVID society after an iffy election and a very dubious war response and incredible censorship? I mean, it's a crucial period for humanity, and so we need to invite those voices on and be able to really give them space to listen. And I think a lot of really doing good journalism is being humble, really. And there's not a lot of humility in this field as it stands. Hello from London. We love London. Thank you very much, Daniel, for being here. Wow, an exceptionally great crowd tonight. I am blown away. And thank you for letting me get so deep on female targets and Sue Lyon. Sue Lyon is somebody that I felt more things are going to come out about. And I feel a lot with that story, and just the remarkable person that she was, coming from Iowa and really lighting the world up with her incredible performance at such a young age, but being exploited in the way that she was, just really making a huge difference. So those are the types of people that I try to connect with and tell their story and bring it forward on another level, so we can understand the type of forces that were behind the scenes manipulating the things in their lives. And it's been so crucial. Fantastic. Carl Young, thank you very much, sir. Hi from the future here in Auckland. Wow, New Zealand. I would love to visit New Zealand. I know Jacinda is there running everything with an iron hand, but besides that, I have to say, whew, beautiful, beautiful. And I know they shot some of Lord of the Rings there. That's why that looks so great. Wow, fantastic. David Lynch films. Yeah. Well, let me say David Lynch is one of the greatest. And there's no question that Blue Velvet is his best. I think his work with Twin Peaks is incredible. Very informed by anthroposophy, by the way, across the board. But, I don't know. I mean, he even Eraserhead is like, whew, very, very going into very interesting psychological territory, subconscious territory. You ever get the impression that Lynch knows a lot? I do. I get that impression. Interview Keshi on free energy. Yeah. Well, the topic is fascinating, and it's Susan Manowich was the person I'm thinking of having on the spring about that, but I'll look at everybody. Yes. Seaberg, also from Iowa. Isn't that interesting? Golden Girl, thank you. I love Eraserhead. Yeah, had quite an impact on me in the day. Well, this is interesting because Seaberg was in the Lilith movie, and that was supposed to be the vehicle for. This is how Phillips was basically going to. Harris, I'm sorry. This is how Harris was going to dispose of Sue Lyon in this movie. Very interesting about Seaberg. I don't know much about her, but that is an interesting piece. And I feel like they know where to get the real kind of innocent, candidate for what they need to do. And certainly Sue was one of those. And I think she was genuinely confused by the things that had happened there. And thank you, Spanman. Sue is remarkable. There are movies, very obscure movies that she was in, like The Astral Factor, and they put her in a lot of horror movies and things after the fact. But she was an incredible sport about it, and but in truth, she was a megastar and a mega talent. And I think her sort of career destruction was designed. See if I have any last minute shots to use. It's a shot of Michelle Phillips. The things that Michelle Phillips could come in this program and tell us about her friend, Sue Lyon. And her own life, of course. My goodness. Unbelievable. So incredible shows to come. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me tonight. We will see you all next week. And we'll take your questions then as well. I have some exciting interviews coming up for you next week with some surprises. So watch out for that. Have a fantastic weekend. And again, go to darkjournalist.com, subscribe to our newsletter, and make sure that you're counted with us. Jeff Bezos in the intro. Yeah. You know what I'll do is in my Twitter feed, I'll put all the pictures of Jeff Bezos wearing the Lolita glasses at a party recently. And it was just a weird thing for him to be doing. And it was also like during a particularly tough time. And, you know, they were pumping up Omicron and, we're shutting this down and shutting that down. And this guy's partying in a pool with the Lolita glasses. And it looked like kind of an S&M guy behind him. So I'll have to. I figured there's so much crossover with those glasses. I could do a show just on that. But let me tell you that there's something weird with the Hart glasses in relation to all this. There are so many examples of it that you're going to have to take a real good look at how that steganography works. And when you see it, it gets very strange how things open up on the steganography side. I want to recommend to you ForbiddenKnowledgeTV.com, Alexandra Bruce, and all the great work that she's doing over there. Of course, Gigi Young's site at gigiyoung.com. Gigi just put out a remarkable, interesting little video piece on Mars and some of the secret society activity in relation to that. Of course, the work of Catherine Austin Fitz is coming up on the program again here shortly, and as is Dr. Farrell at GiesecDeathStar.com. All our faves. And I want to mention Cryptagon as well. Cryptagon.com, really, really interesting site. Could be .net. I have to think about that, but it's CRYPTOGON. This guy is always getting interesting stories ahead of the curve, and really, really interesting stuff. So Cryptagon, check him out. And so many great stuff for us to kind of work with. And so thank God we have those great voices out there. We will see y'all next week. Thank you, Kat, for running the Ideas Room. Thank you, everyone in the Ideas Room. Got big surprises coming up for you. And we will see you all next week. And, you know, it says end broadcast, but after all, it never really ends. Let's face it. Thank you, everyone. Wait, that's a good one. El Zen, love all my fellow seekers. Yes. Some guy reads Farrell's books out loud. Oh, you'll have to tell me what that is. Animal Black's got it. Never ends. That's the point. Cat Goida. Yes, yes, yes. Darla Cash. Anthony. Scarlet Fire. Woo. Erica, Mr. Wonderful. Hey, that's my name. No, wait. Luke Walker. Erica Swanson Elliott. Thank you for being out there, Erica. Caritas Tarot. This is just something I slipped on. I have a terrific weekend and we shall be okay. No worries now. Yes, exactly. I like that. Oh, this guy's got it. Trump 2024. That takes some gut. We'll see. We'll see what's going on there. Bye, Empress. Golden Girl. Renee Newton. Thanks so much, everyone. All right, we'll see y'all next week, and have a great weekend. You can't believe the April we have in store for you. And thanks all so much for being here with us. We'll see y'all next week.